Good afternoon. Thank you for indulging us for a few minutes. We were trying to get a different, an updated PowerPoint presentation, trying to get that right off of the laptop. And we're going to go with the one that we had before. If you would, allow me to open us up here in a word of prayer, and then we will get started. Father, we come to you today in the precious name of Jesus. Lord, I'm asking that you bring clarity. I'm asking that you help me, help all of us to understand the issue at hand and the different facets, that is, the perspectives of this issue. I suppose more than anything, Lord, I'm asking that you rule and reign supremely in every heart, in every mind, in every mouth. I'm asking, Lord, that you would give us that insight, give us discernment. I ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Our format for today will be this. I'm going to lay down some rules, give an introduction. Then I'm going to establish a foundation for what we're going to do. Then I'm going to introduce our guest presenter, and then he's going to do a presentation that he's prepared. Following that, we'll move the podium out of the way, and our panel members will come up to the stage, and then we will give each one of these men one or more opportunities to reflect and give their perspectives. That's what you came to hear. You came to hear the presenter. You came to hear these men that you know. And in putting together a panel, I know this. When I read something, whatever it might be, do you struggle with what to believe? Which narrative do you believe? I struggle with which narrative to believe. Do I believe that whether it's what's going on with the legal system, whether it's what's going on at Washington, D.C., I always struggle. What's true? What's real? What's right? And one of the things that we tried to do is we tried to bring together a panel of people that are Mays County people. They're people that you know. These are people that have already been vetted. These are people that you know have served in their profession and established credibility. Credibility is a must in seeking to determine truth, what is right. So, first, let me start with this. Actually, second. This is not a forum. It was never promoted as such. It is a presentation on the Lord's Day, Sunday. It's a presentation on the day of the Lord. And this is something that we do twice each Sunday. We have a Sunday morning and a Sunday evening service. But today we've had a slight time adjustment. And this is serving as our evening study time. And it's hosted by the First Baptist Church of Pryor, which properties and facilities, it goes without saying, have been paid for with the charitable contributions of congregants worshiping the Lord Jesus here since 1899. This has not been paid for with tax dollars. None of this. Amen. There have been people that have been faithful givers for 119 years to make all of these facilities and all these properties, all the land, all the parking lots, all of that. Those are people that have been faithful for all these years to make that available. This means that we get to establish the rules, which are simple. They're very simple. It's kind of like our and then we will give each one of these men one or more opportunities to reflect and give their perspectives. That's what you came to hear. You came to hear the presenter. You came to hear these men that you know. And in putting together a panel, I know this. When I read something, whatever it might be, do you struggle with what to believe? Which narrative do you believe? I struggle with which narrative to believe. Do I believe that whether it's what's going on with the legal system, whether it's what's going on at Washington, D.C., I always struggle with what's true, what's real, what's right. And one of the things that we tried to do is we tried to bring together a panel of people that are Mays County people. They're people that you know. These are people that have already been vetted. These are people that you know have served in their profession and established credibility. Credibility is a must in seeking to determine truth, what is right. So, first, let me start with this. Actually, second. This is not a forum. It was never promoted as such.
It is a presentation on the Lord's Day, Sunday. It's a presentation on the day of the Lord. And this is something that we do twice each Sunday. We have a Sunday morning and a Sunday evening service. But today we've had a slight time adjustment. And this is serving as our evening study time. And it's hosted by the First Baptist Church of Pryor, which properties and facilities, it goes without saying, have been paid for with the charitable contributions of congregants worshiping the Lord Jesus here since 1899. This has not been paid for with tax dollars. None of this. There have been people that have been faithful givers for 119 years to make all of these facilities and all these properties, all the land, all the parking lots, all of that. Those are people that have been faithful for all these years to make that available. This means that we get to establish the rules, which are simple. They're very simple. It's kind of like our dress code. Here's our dress code at First Baptist Church of Pryor. 3 words. Just wear something. Okay? We really try to keep things simple. We really do try to keep things simple. This means that we want you to behave the way you would behave in a normal church service. To be clear, this means to act with reverence for the Lord Jesus and this locale. I implore you to do that. And with respect toward everyone inside and outside this building, including our presenter, including each panel member, and hopefully even for me. Second, God is never the author or instigator of disorder, of commotion or disruption in a church. We learned this in 1 Corinthians 14:33. Minimal orderliness translates into minimal dignity. Never forget that, friends. Our best behavior, characterized by the fruit of the Spirit, found in Galatians 5:22 and 23. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faithfulness, meekness, and self-control. 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 The fruit of the Spirit is never more needed than now, especially self-control. Third, if my words mean anything to you, if you have even an ounce of respect for the Lord Jesus, this locale, or anything I've said thus far, I implore you, when entering or exiting, and when inside this building, not to be disruptive in any way, but to be respectful and not to engage verbally or certainly not physically with protesters or disruptors. And my prayer is there will be none of that. No matter what, do not engage. Law enforcement officers are the only ones authorized to engage physically, and we pray to God that that does not become necessary. Be attentive.
Do what now?
Be courteous. Ignore attempts to disrupt. Show superior self-control. Be Christian. Follow our lead. Live your faith, especially in the pinch of life. Fourth, I implore you, each one of us, to be a truth detective. The number one objective of every one of us in this room, proponent, opponent of the state question, the number one objective is to be, or it ought to be a truth detective. What is true? What is true? Being truth detectives is never more needed than now. Fifth, morality is a word associated with right and wrong behavior, and with the goodness and badness of human character. For me, as the pastor of the church, this state question is not about Democratic or Republican Party platforms or candidates. It is a moral question with significant social implications, which is why I am involved and why our church is hosting this event. Sixth, most people know what they believe about life and everything else. All you need to do is ask them. But many don't know why they believe what they believe. I find that with Christians about theology. I find that with most everybody. I find it with myself. Today is about letting us explain what we believe and why we believe it, as we implement Christ's directive to us to be salt and light. Matthew 5:13 through 16. Salt cleanses. It purifies. And you know what else salt does? It preserves. It might sting a little while it's preserving. But that's the role of salt. It preserves. I can tell you that there are many who believe that the passage of this state question will not preserve morality, will not preserve social justice, as it were. It is without question that the secularization of America is underway, and efforts at this are intensifying. Yet, we are still told to be a preserving, purifying agent, the salt of the earth. Further, light serves to dispel darkness so that we can see the best path forward. Being salt and light is never more needed than now. These are the introductory remarks. I want to do a quick flyover for some areas that are of interest to me. I want to try to address a couple of things, namely the philosophical theological issue, or the issue from a philosophical and theological perspective, as well as from a moral perspective. I've heard this argument. It's a proponent argument. Marijuana comes from nature, so because it is natural, it is good. I read a fine article by a philosophy professor at one of our state universities that said this, quote, being more in line with God's will than what is coming out of the pharmaceutical laboratories. And so God has been brought into the mix, into the issue. Well, that's my cue. The philosophical, the theological. What is there on earth that's not provided by God through nature? Paint, carpet, all of the materials that we see, everything that we have has ultimately been mined from nature. Everything comes from nature. Poisonous mushrooms come from the earth too, as do copperheads, ticks, arsenic, cyanide, opioids, and everything else. While everything on earth, including fiddleback spiders, I want to ask the Lord when I get to heaven, why? Why fiddleback spiders? Everything on earth, including fiddleback spiders, had a useful purpose in God's economy at the time of creation. But Romans 8:18 through 22 reminds us that all of creation is under the curse of sin. All of creation. In other words, including human beings, everything, all of creation, is subpar in some way. It's not in its pure state as God intended at creation. Romans 8:18 through 22. Creation has been distorted such that its original purpose has been greatly compromised. Likewise, history has proven that smoking plants, which nobody will convince me was God's original intention for tobacco or marijuana, is just slightly less harmful for the human body than drinking a beer laced with rattlesnake venom.
What now?
The natural argument is impotent in seeking to justify legalization of medical marijuana. Secondly, another proponent argument. Marijuana as a medicine is better than opioid use and abuse. The logic here seems to be choosing the lesser of two evils. That's the logic, if we boil it down. But it is far from certain that marijuana is the lesser of the two evils being compared. I'm left to rely on medical professionals to answer this, which is why they are here. Opioid use at least has a system in place to regulate prescribing and dispensing the opioids. It's not like Lortab, Percocet, Percodan, or Oxycodone are growing in the backyard garden. What could possibly go wrong if they were? Choosing the lesser of two evils argument is always a last resort argument, and Oklahoma is not there. We simply need to enforce the opioid regulations already in place. Marijuana, studies suggest, and I'm going to rely again on the medical professionals, is addictive too. So just as people abuse opioids, they will abuse marijuana as well, but they want to do so without impunity. And this is part of what legalization efforts are about now. And just as people addicted to opioids find ways to obtain them illegally and in greater quantities that are beyond the medically prescribed ways, they're already doing so now with marijuana and will do the same even if marijuana is legalized as medicine. I grew up in Muskogee, Oklahoma. There's a song about Muskogee. You remember that one? You remember one of the lines? We don't smoke marijuana in Muskogee. That's a lie. Here's another proponent argument. I'm in pain and it's my body, so I should get to decide what I put in it. Here's the moral part. Our rights as citizens are not unlimited. Our constitutional rights as citizens are not unlimited. Our liberties are significantly restricted, or our liberties even end when they invade another person's space. And theirs are restricted or end when they enter our space. This is where moral considerations enter the conversation. Here's what we need to understand, or at least one of the aspects. We do not live in a social vacuum. I might be inclined to allow marijuana as a medicine if the user were Jeremiah Johnson, and that's an old movie that tells my age, living in the mountains, hundreds of miles from civilization, who only engaged with grizzly bears, mountain lions, and wolverines, and who would never drive a school bus, a car, a fork truck, or a semi. But the stark reality is that we all live in community. For instance, when we burn trash on our own property, it can affect our neighbor. So even this must be regulated and not left up to the whims of the landowner. Why? To protect others. Here's another proponent argument. Marijuana is a medication with healing power. All we need to do is go back and read history books, and we can go back for thousands of years. There's always been somebody that's got some brand new snake oil salesman, something that's been around for centuries. And believe me, this has. We can go back to the Oracle at Delphi in Greek culture and we can read about that. But I have questions about the medical value of marijuana, and so do you. Is marijuana the next generation miracle drug? And I'm going to leave that to our doctors to answer and to tackle. Is marijuana the great cure-all natural medicine which the big pharmaceutical companies don't want us to know about or have access to? Is that really valid? I will defer these questions to those far more competent than me, but I simply want to raise these questions. And here's a warning. The selective breeding being done with marijuana today is yielding plants with THC levels that are 20 to 30% higher than in the past. So if you thought that your friends in school were blurry-eyed, sluggish, and seeing weird things when high on a THC level of 2 to 4%, think of this condition multiplied by 10 due to the increased potency of the THC with its hallucinatory power, and Oklahomans have serious problems. In Oklahoma, we put certain non-prescription medications containing pseudoephedrine behind the counters to keep people from buying it by the pound to make meth. What do you think will happen when people can grow their own pot in the backyard? You're only going to wish that your neighbor was growing tomatoes and okra in his garden. Finding an article endorsing legalization of medical marijuana written by anyone from the medical community, legal community, law enforcement community, or from a Christian pastor has proven to be difficult. I didn't say impossible. It's proven to be difficult to find articles from credible sources. This should speak volumes. But everybody on Facebook and Twitter has an opinion. I have sought briefly to address this issue from the theological, philosophical, and moral perspectives. I know it's a flyby. I'm sorry about that, but time constraints shorten what I want to say. I will now leave it up to our panel members to address this issue from the drug enforcement, medical, educational, and legal perspectives. Having said this, I now want to welcome DEA agent, Special Agent in Charge, DEA Oklahoma, Rich Salter. Would you please welcome him? Richard, come up here. Where's the cluster of microphones? There it is. It's in the dark. Yeah. I see a red and a white. And I believe... Yeah, touch it, push it on the very bottom, on the bottom. Yeah, right down here, just to push it and hold it. You should get a green light. Check that out. It's working?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll tell you, after hearing the pastor speak, I wish I had him at all our other previous about 25 presentations that Susan and I have done since February. And Susan and I have done this together just about every time. I think her and Brian Serber up front here may have done one together, but Susan Rogers is a director of the dental board. She's also a lawyer. She was a previous lawyer to for OBN, Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, and she's also a municipal court judge. And she really knows the legal aspects of this statute much better than anybody else that I know. And the perspective that I bring to this discussion is, I've been a cop for 32 years, the last 28 of which have been DEA. I've watched families get torn apart for the last 28 years on drugs, from basically all the crack epidemic, all the way through the cocaine of late 80s and 90s, and into the opioids of the late 90s to now. And it's not magic. We know how we got here. We know how we got here with opioids. Marijuana didn't get us here with opioids, and marijuana can't get us out of it with opioids. It's just going to have to run its course. And I know that one of the big messages that the proponents are coming out, that marijuana can get us out of the opioid problem. Well, it's just not. The science is not there for that. And in every state that's legalized marijuana, we're tracking the overdose deaths in those states to opioids, and they're going up. And the overdose deaths to cocaine and methamphetamine in states that have legalized marijuana are going up. And so, without getting too much into that, I want to let you guys know where we're coming from. And something that the pastor said that struck me was, be detectives of the truth. And if you believe that the root of all evil is money, which it is, at least in my world, then follow the money. Susan and I are doing this on our time. We're not getting paid for it. It's the pharmaceutical industry. We've been accused of being operatives of the pharmaceutical industry. I still don't get that. I don't, you know.
I do.
We are going after the pharmaceutical industry daily, having to hold them accountable for the opioid crisis. And so, my kids are grown. I've got them through. I get them off the cell phone bill, off the insurance bill. That's my goal. If you're a parent, you got teenagers, that's your goal. I'm here for your kids, and that's basically it. I'm in the last years of my career with DEA. I'm here for your children. Do I care if adults want to go home and smoke dope? I care if they have kids. Do I care if a veteran wants to smoke dope because that's PTSD? No, if that helps them, I don't care. But I do care about legalizing something that is addictive, that's more addictive than tobacco. And I don't know if you knew this, but tobacco has killed more people in the world than any other drug, to the tune of about 6 million people a year. And this is something that's marketed the same. So if this is ballots approved, if you look at the other states, the marketing on marijuana is the same as early tobacco marketing. They market it to young people, teenagers, adolescents, because it's something that's addictive. You can sell an addictive substance to a kid, you've got a customer for life. And if you look at some of the edibles, the marketing to edibles, marijuana edibles, why on earth would anybody market marijuana edibles to make it look like candy? To me, just ask that question. Who are they marketing to? They're not marketing to me or anybody else that eats candy. I mean, you can see right here, I don't need more candy. But with that, we'll get started, but I want to pass the mic to Susan and let her reintroduce herself.
Hi there, my name is Susan Rogers. Rich actually approached me back in January to help him put together a presentation for all the chiefs of police across the state, just to give people information about really what they're voting for. We're not here to tell you how to vote. We want you to vote whatever you feel like you need to vote. But we want people to understand really what this ballot title and actual statutes that will go into place actually say. And it's really, it kind of surprises people when they realize that, because the way it's being sold to people is, it's going to raise money for schools, etc. Well, we have actual data and stats that have come out from all of this stuff. We actually update our presentation every time we do something, and this is, I think, our 26th or 27th time. And this is a little bit of an older presentation, but we're going to tell you the other things that we've learned since, because we learn something new every time, and people send us things on a regular basis. We read constantly on articles, and we're actually involved also in the discussions of the Department of Health, trying to put together, the rules and some other things in case it does pass. So from a personal perspective, I've been a municipal court judge for over 20 years now, and I have a juvenile docket. I help several cities across the whole state set up juvenile court dockets. Those kids are really important to me, and what happens to them is very important to me. And one of the things that happens is, in my juvenile court docket, 80% of the kids that are there will not pass a drug test for marijuana. And they're dropping out of school. It's a depressant to them. They don't care. And so one of the few tools I have is I have the ability to get them off of marijuana and off of drugs for a little while to get stabilized back, get back in school, and try to get, graduated. Getting them graduated is one of my goals in my juvenile court. And if they don't, a lot of times they don't. They fell out of school and they don't ever try to come back. They get too behind. If this passes, it really concerns me that a lot of those kids will never ever get back on path, because the marijuana that you're dealing with now is not the ditchweed kind of stuff that we grew up with. We all had friends in school that smoked pot. That stuff was about 4%, 5% THC. The pot that's coming in now is up to 30% THC. It's high level pot. And so nowadays in court I have to ask, because I have a time period that they have to have a clean drug test. I have to ask them, is it pot from around here or is it from Colorado? And if they say Colorado, typically for years it's been 30 days to clear your system. Pot now, I have to give them 45 days to clear their system. And truthfully, I've talked to a bunch of DAs across the state, because a bunch of my friends, and I would rather a kid drink than I had smoke pot, because drinking clears your system in 24 hours. Pot stays there for 30 to 45 days. So that's just one thing to think about.
You can go ahead and start the presentation. There we go. Just next slide. And we will separate some myth from fact from fiction that you hear, because you'll hear a lot of stuff in the media. You'll hear most of what you hear in the media is not true. Most of what you hear in the media is not true. And you'll hear some people say that marijuana cures cancer. Well, if marijuana cured cancer, then I guarantee you the pharmaceutical industry would have capitalized on that a long time ago. And,
that's why they have patents.
So what we think is, if this gets approved, and it very well may get approved, and if it does get approved, then we will reach a balance, because I've worked all over the country, and Oklahoma is the most family-friendly state I've ever been in, and I've chosen this for my home. I usually tell people I wasn't born here, but I got here as fast as I could. And I in my heart, I do believe that if this does pass, and it's the will of the people, then I give it 2 years. I give it 2 years, and then I give the people that are raising young children, kids are going to be, being suspended for school. What you do is you're normalizing what's going on across the country. You're normalizing something. So as this is being approved through the country on medical, okay, the medical angle for marijuana was a strategy. It was the early 90s. It was a strategy that 3 billionaires came up with, okay? And there was an organization out there called NORML, N-O-R-M-L. If you want to Google it, they've been pushing for full legalization of marijuana and other drugs since the early 90s. So in about 1993, a billionaire, I won't say his name, but he wasn't born in the United States, and he came to the director of NORML and said, you know what, if you do this my way, if we go at this from a medical standpoint, and we convince the people that marijuana is medicinal, I will fund it. And so for the first 6 years, he funded it to the tune of $15 million of his own money. And believe it or not, states like I'm sure it was California, Arizona, they voted this down the first 2 or 3 times that it went up. But this industry will keep coming back. If this fails in Oklahoma, it'll be back on the ballot for November, okay?
That's right.
And so, which is fine with me, because I'm going to keep talking about it. Even after I retire, I'll keep talking about it, because I know it's wrong and I know it's bad for your kids. But that's how we got here. And in early 1993, they had no clue that one component of the marijuana plant would have a moderate medicinal value in the treatment of 2 forms of epilepsy for young kids. And you can do next slide. And so that's called CBD, cannabidiol. Did I say it right, Patrick? It's called CBD. And this slide up here talks about a pure form of CBD that will likely, very, very likely be approved by the end of next week by the FDA. And so they have been in clinical trials on CBD for years. This one has gotten a 27% positive rate on treatment of 2 forms of childhood epilepsy. So you take that argument out of the equation, because this will be available. Right now, it's been legal in Oklahoma. Unregulated CBD has been legal in Oklahoma since 2015. So these commercials that you see on the different news channels, depending on what position they take, it'll show a family with an epileptic child, and they'll show the child seizing, and the family will then say, and they won't say CBD, because CBD is the only thing that has a positive treatment for these types of epilepsy. So you won't hear them say, I need CBD. They'll say, I need my cannabis. Okay? So cannabis means the entire plant. CBD is one chemical component of the marijuana plant. And so the families will say, well, I had to move out of the state. I had to move away from my home to go to Colorado just to treat my child. Well, that's not true, because they can buy CBD down at the local shop. Lots of different CBD shops now selling it. Now, is it still illegal federally? Yes, it is. Depends on how they make it. But we're not messing with it. It's the state says it's legal, then we leave it alone, and people can get it. But for the families that speak up sometimes and say, you know, if you had a disabled child, you would use this. Well, I have a disabled child, and one of the things that they say CBD cures or marijuana cures is autism, Asperger's. Well, guess what? If it did, I have an autistic child, then I'd be giving it to my autistic child. But I wouldn't give them this unregulated CBD that's in the that's being sold off the shelves here, because when you can make that stuff in your garage. If it's unregulated, you can make it in your garage, put it in a bottle, put a label on it, and sell it at these shops. So all of the pesticides and the other toxins that are inherent in some of these grows, these marijuana grows, will make it into that bottle of CBD, and that's what's happening with some of the CBD products that are being sold throughout Colorado here, and so I think it's the next slide.
So one of the things that Rich told me when we first started putting this PowerPoint together was, he said, Susan, he goes, we got to put on here that CBD is already legal, because people think that they're voting for letting kids have CBD oil because they have epilepsy to fix them. That is not what you're voting for. That is already legal in Oklahoma, and it's one of the most important things. The other myth that we hear pretty regularly is, oh, well, you got to make it legal so that people can go test it and do these testing things to learn all the medicinal properties to it. That's also not true. That's another myth. DEA actually has a way that you can make an application and get permission to use the marijuana for medical testing, to try to prove that it does have medicinal value. When we started doing these presentations back in January, and we're putting this together, there was 107 applications at DEA, because Rich actually brought down the person that's in charge of scheduling, and he's a pharmacist, and there was 107 applications, and he checks with him about every other week, and truthfully, we've been so busy the last 2 weeks that we haven't talked to him, but about 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was at 431. At least 80 to 85% of those are marijuana testing. So for people to say it needs to be legal to be tested for medicinal value, not true either. Not true either. There already is a legal method to do that.
It's the most tested Schedule I drug the DEA schedules completely. That's what they're spending, and it's been that way for years. You know, marijuana, CBD's been around since the 1800s. It's been around a long time. But in 1993, when they came up with this strategy to close the loop on that, what I was saying, they had no idea that CBD in 2018 would have a medicinal benefit for epilepsy. So in the end of this, and I don't think the video will play, it actually shows a video of the guy talking about it, and basically what he's saying. He was the president, or the president of NORML at the time. His name was Richard Cohen, if you want to Google him. He says the key to legalizing marijuana would be medical access. And he says by the time the country realizes the scam, it will be too late, we will be too far along, and then we will push through with full legalization. And they have carried out that strategy in every single state. They have outspent the opponents in every single state 10 to 1, and I'm sure they're doing the same thing in Oklahoma, because the only people opposed to this would be, to raise money to oppose this, would be coming from within your state. The money proposed, or the proponents of this, the money in favor of it is coming from outside the state. It's well funded, and now there's a marijuana industry that's pushing most of the money. The billionaires are still putting in quite a bit. I think they're up to 55 million. But now you have an industry it's a new tobacco industry. And make no mistake, people are going to make billions and billions of dollars on marijuana. And that's what they want. That's what this is about. It's about money. I always say follow the money. Why would 3 billionaires care if marijuana, who has more money than they ever going to need, why would they care if marijuana is legalized because they're in it to make money. That's the bottom line. So look, Susan now is going to talk about what the ballot says and what it means in reality for the state if it gets passed.
There's a lot of conflicting language in this ballot, and one of the things that people have said is, well, whether it's medical or not. We're not really evaluating whether there's medicinal value, but here is the difference. So in every other state that's had a ballot title out there, it's been a list of conditions that you have to be able to get a medical marijuana card. So, and every state has something different, cancer, glaucoma, etc. Ours does not have that. Ours says if you go to the doctor and the doctor thinks you need it, basically you can say, I have a headache, my knee hurts, and in some places it's kind of a joke. And that's all you have to have. Doctor doesn't have to have anything specific to diagnose you with. You can just say, I just want it because my head hurts, I get headaches. Okay, they can give you a card. So it's really not medical in that sense. There's not a medicinal requirement to be able to obtain a card. One of the conflicts in the law says basically once you have a card, you can buy medical marijuana. They call it medical marijuana, but in reality for us in law enforcement, it's actually recreational. There's nothing short of it's recreational. So one of the conflicts in the law says that if you are somebody who does not have a medical marijuana card and you get stopped by law enforcement, that all you have to do is tell them that you have a medical condition. And then the maximum fine that you can get is a $400 fine. So we need that next slide.
Next slide.
Oh my God. I'm so sick of this picture.
Yeah, when we get here, the PowerPoint that's actually loaded up had to be converted from Microsoft, so we may jump around on slides, but the information, we've done this so many times, we can get you the information out.
Yeah, so what you're allowed to have is 3 ounces of marijuana on your person, 6 mature marijuana plants, 6 seedlings, 1 ounce of concentrated marijuana, which Rich will explain what that is, 72 ounces of edible marijuana, which is the brownies, and that is 4.5 pounds of edibles, 8 ounces of ounces in your residence, and all of these amounts are cumulative. So what that means is that every person in the household that has a card may have that amount cumulative. And you start counting that up, and it's a lot more than you realize.
And then this slide is that we usually play this slide after a slide that may be up here later on, but we do a lot of marijuana eradication in the state, and we have a picture of one of our troopers who's about 6'5", and the largest marijuana plant we've seen in Oklahoma is about 8-foot tall plant. It's about a fourth of this plant that you're seeing there. That marijuana plant is out of Humboldt County, California. You can see the man standing. We got lights in our eyes, but you can see the man standing to the left of the plant. That's one marijuana plant. So they perfected the growing of these plants out there in Humboldt County, California. You can Google this stuff too, but these plants in Humboldt County are yielding 100 pounds per plant, 100 pounds of marijuana per plant.
You're allowed to have 6 of these.
And then when you're talking about the amounts that they can possess of actually smokable marijuana, so you can possess smokables, edibles, and extract, okay? And then the plants. So the amount that you can smoke, you can carry around with you 3 ounces of marijuana. That's 168 joints, and the math is pretty standard, a half a gram of marijuana per joint. So that's 168 joints that someone can carry around in their pocket, in their car, whatever it might be. And I don't know how medicinal that can be, but then at home you can have an additional 8 ounces, which is another 448 joints at your house for your backup, just in case you need some more. And then on top of that, so then you go to edibles. This is the part that scares me, are the edibles and the extracts. The edibles, because they're marketed for children. They're marketed to look like candy bars, gummy bears. Who in their right mind would do that?
We have a slide that'll show you in a few minutes.
And then, so how many kids do you guys know? My kids were little. If I laid a candy bar down that looked like a Reese's cup or looked like a gummy bear, how many kids are going to eat one of those? So a gummy bear is 10 milligrams of THC. Kids aren't going to eat one. And so what's happening in Colorado and Oregon and California, these kids are grabbing these marijuana edibles and they're eating them, and they're ending up in the hospital. I have an actual article in the other PowerPoint where a mom was actually charged because her child, it was a toddler, got a hold of some marijuana edibles, ate too much, overdosed on it, and ended up in the hospital in the emergency room. So the sheriff's charging her with with neglect or child endangerment. Well, I don't know what the charge, but that's in Oregon because they're seeing the same thing now. Colorado's seeing it first because they were the first to legalize recreational marijuana. This picture here, is this the next slide? So
That's the edibles back
go back, please. Okay, so here's the edible, the pictures of the edibles, and I didn't have to hunt for these things. If you Google marijuana edibles, most everything you're going to see looks like candy or juice drinks or something that a child would drink, and it looks like a Reese's bar. And all of these edibles will have it contains so many milligrams of THC, up to about 65 to 80 milligrams is the highest I've seen, down as low as 10 milligrams per gummy bear. And go ahead and go back. Is this the one you've already read? Yes.
Actually, this is where so when we were doing a presentation, we were putting out these amounts, and everybody goes, no one knows how much an ounce is, but we all know how much a joint is. So Rich figured out how much it is per joint, per ounce equivalent to joints, and that's what this is. And I think he's already told you most of those.
I think I didn't cover the extracts. So
Right.
when they talk about THC extracts, sorry about that. Might run out of battery. So do you guys know what marijuana extract is? And what it is they'll take some marijuana, whether it's high grade THC, 30% or low grade, what we see as what we call ditchweed. They'll stuff that down in a PVC pipe. They'll put a screen on the bottom of it with a coffee filter, and they will fill that pipe up and shoot a can of butane through it. And so that butane will extract out the THC, and it'll come out at the bottom, and it'll look like a waxy brown stuff, and it's pure THC. And the only thing I can compare it to is crack cocaine, because crack cocaine is it's the base part of cocaine, and so it only takes like a rock, a small little pinhead to smoke to be able to, whether it's crack or even this marijuana extract. And basically the marijuana, the drug addicts we've talked to says, you know what, 3 hits off of marijuana extract and I'm done. And I never, unlike opioids that you build resistance to, you need more and more and more, they call it chasing the dragon. This guy was saying, I never have to hit more than 3 times and I'm done. And I don't know if you guys, anybody from, any emergency room doctors or nurses here? Just, okay. Anybody else? I was at the emergency room one night, and a teenager came in and was talking to his parents, and he was hallucinating. He was hallucinating. The only thing that was in his system was marijuana. He was hallucinating, and his heart rate was over 220 beats per minute. And that's standard if you Google an overdose symptoms to high levels of THC. And he had eaten half a brownie of marijuana, half a brownie of just green marijuana, not even marijuana extract. And so that's kind of, we'll see that. And I know we're seeing that because I've talked to other emergency room personnel. And I asked them, basically, what are you seeing Friday and Saturday nights? They said, no, it's every night. It's not Friday and Saturday night. And I would guess that it's happening here too.
Okay, so when you...
I guess.
Is it working now? Okay, so when you guys go to the ballots, to vote on Tuesday, there's a simple ballot title, and it'll be about this long, and this is what it's going to say. It's going to say that you're voting to legalize the licensed sale and growth of marijuana in Oklahoma for medicinal purposes. And a license is required to buy marijuana, and it has to be approved by a certified board-certified physician, and you have to be 18 or older, unless you have 1 parent and 2 physicians can give a person under 18 give them a card. And that unlicensed possession, so if you don't have a license, you tell an officer that you have a medical condition, that it's only a $400 fine. Shall this be approved? That's all you're going to get. So people think, oh yeah, it's for medicine for kids. No. What actually goes into statute is that first part that we showed you, listing about how much that you're allowed to have. There's another section in the back that prohibits cities from zoning out any kind of marijuana-related business. If you're a landlord, if anybody here has rental property, you are prohibited from keeping somebody out of your house that has a marijuana card. So you can keep them from renting your house if they have dogs. You can keep them renting your house for smoking, but you cannot keep them out of your house for marijuana. In zoning, you saw the big plants. Well, cities are prohibited from zoning these things out. So arguably, as a former city attorney for 11 years, and as a city judge for longer than that, we have the weed people that come around, the code enforcement. If it's no longer a weed, it will be a medicinal plant, so it will no longer be a weed. So they can grow it in their front yard, they can grow it in their backyard, there will be nothing anybody can do about it. And this has been a real problem in some other states because people have been robbed. I have family in Colorado that they manage rental property. They manage very high dollar houses. There was some people that went to Italy for a year and they have $1 million house. They rented out the house to 2 college kids. 1 month, less than 30 days, they had done $50,000 worth of damage by doing an indoor grow because all the warehouses are full trying to get indoor grow licenses. And so these are issues that people just need to realize. You cannot zone them out of where any of the businesses cannot be zoned out. The only place that they can be prohibited from is they can't be within 1,000 feet of a schoolway door. And that's it.
And if you're rental, can you guys hear me okay? So if you have rental properties, you can keep people from having dogs or smoking tobacco, but you can't stop them from taking their medicine. So they'll be able to smoke, they'll be able to grow, and a marijuana grow house, when they're out and done, it's as toxic as a meth lab. So with the molds and stuff that's in there, that would have to be cleaned out. But you can't not rent from them because of that.
There's no prohibitions about being right next to a daycare or any of the other things that we normally have.
Next slide. So here's what 72 ounces of edibles look like, just for a visual. On top of the amount you can carry of green actually smokable marijuana, this is the edibles. And so if 8 ounces, if the 630 or 650 joints are not enough, then you can have 10 boxes of brownies made up for backup. I
used to make fun of Rich for this slide because this was his idea, and it's really been one of our best and most effective slides because people think, oh gosh, I haven't had that many brownies that made at once unless I'm doing a bake sale. But this is how many they're allowed to have in your house at any given time. And it doesn't include the ounce of extract, which is pure THC, or your plants. Yes, or your plants. Next slide. So there's some conversion guides here also, depending on the THC levels in the edibles that they're advertising. Like the gummy bears, 10 milligrams equal to a joint, and then you go up to about, I can't read that last one, I think it's 100 milligrams, the equivalent of 4 joints. I don't know if this, I think there's not a slide in here, but there was an exchange student out of Africa who was going to school in Wyoming. He's on there. If we get there, I'll tell you the story anyway, just in case it's not. But anyway, he there he is. I forgot his name. But he and 3 friends went to Denver just to go to Denver vacation in between school break. And he was not a drug user, but they went to a marijuana shop and each of them bought 1 cookie, 1 marijuana infused cookie with 65 milligrams of THC. And now this is a college kid. This is not a child. So they're out at their Holiday Inn, tall Holiday Inn, had a lot of floors because he ended up dying. So he eats a bite of his cookie, he doesn't feel anything because it takes 30 to 90 minutes for THC to take effects on you, the high effects on an edible versus smoking it. He takes another bite, didn't feel anything, takes another bite. He ends up eating the whole cookie, and then 30, 45 minutes later, he starts to hallucinate. He thinks he can fly, and he jumps off the balcony. So when, a lot of the proponents will say, you cannot overdose on marijuana. You can't. Well, yes, you can. Not in the sense that you can with an opioid that'll suppress your respiratory system, you stop breathing. But it can certainly make you hallucinate and kill yourself. It can make you high and crash your car and kill yourself and anybody else out there. And it's extremely addictive. So that's this guy's story. And so it really bothers me when they say marijuana's never killed anybody. Well, yeah, it has. It's killed lots of people. And there's been about 3 of these kids that we've seen through articles and people have brought to our attention about this. Would you go back to the last slide real quick? No, the one with the THC values. There it is, okay. So one of the things that you need to be aware of is that when you eat an edible, it takes a lot longer to react than smoking marijuana. So a lot of the kids will eat a bite and they'll say, you're supposed to wait 30 minutes. No, they wait about 5 minutes, then they'll eat more, then they'll eat more, then they'll eat more. And it gets to a point where the THC levels are so high that it causes an LSD-like effect. And that's what caused them to go into severe heart palpitations and makes them go to the hospital. And adults too, it's happened in Colorado quite a bit. In fact, I think we have a slide on here that shows you the percentage of how many times people have called the poison control hotline. So Rich and I have been involved in these discussions at the health department. And one of the questions that came up the other day was, they asked us, they said, do you all have any recommendations on packaging requirements? And these are rules that are potentially proposed, which is a whole separate subject. And so I raised my hand and I said, are you guys going to make them put the THC levels of whatever they're selling on the packaging? And they said, well, yeah, we've got that in the rules. I said, do you have a test for that, or a test for, is there anybody that can test that? And I looked down at the end of the table was the director of the OSBI lab. Her name's Andrea. And I said, Andrea, you guys got a test for THC? Nope, we sure don't. The only groups that actually test for THC right now, and I'm sure everyone is getting geared up in a different way, are private labs, not government certified, not state certified, not anything else. And so those are one of the things that, that it's really kind of interesting to sit in those meetings, because there are so many things that no one has thought of, and not even these other states that have had to deal with this. And you look in Colorado, and I always tell people, Google two things when you get home. Google Durango, Colorado, and homeless, because that is a major problem, is the homeless. And Google Governor of Colorado and repealing marijuana, because the Governor of Colorado just came out a couple of weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, and basically just said, we're not beyond coming back to repeal the legalization of marijuana in Colorado because of the effects of that. And I think we got a slide here that Rich will tell you a little bit more.
In the labs, and following up on the lab question, in Oregon, they're now have passed. I think they have passed legislation. Last time we talked about this, they were going to pass it, but they passed legislation to force any legitimate producer of marijuana edibles and selling marijuana to test it for pesticides. And there's a reason for that, is because the illegal pesticides that are being used on these grows in California, mostly Northern California, are banned in the United States. One specifically is being used the most because it works the best. It's called carbofuran. And they'll put this stuff, they'll sprinkle it around their plants, and they'll paint it. It comes in a pink liquid form as well. They'll paint it on the base of the plants, because the animals will come and eat on these plants when they're young, because they have high sugar content. Those animals, those rabbits or little rats, whatever the field mice are, they're dying at the base of the plant. They're dying right there. That's how potent this stuff is. And the buzzards are coming in, and they're nibbling on them, they're eating on the carcasses. They're being found dead at the base of the plant as well. So this carbofuran is leaching into the ground and coming up into the plant. And then it's also the water that they're stealing. They're actually diverting streams, waterways, natural waterways. They'll take that 1 inch long, those 100-foot rolls of black water pipe. They'll take that, they'll put a coffee can on the bottom of it, punch holes in it as a filter, and they will put that into a stream, and they will siphon that water down to their grow. Well, that water, they're not turning the spigot on and off, they're letting that water run. And so that water's taking that carbofuran and it's running into the watershed. So now, this particular, and the reason I'm talking about is because the slides are not on here, but there's a biologist that was trying to figure out why this one endangered species that feeds on porcupines, believe it or not, they were finding these things dead. They tag them and they were finding them dead. So he ran into some marijuana eradication cops and said, we can tell you why. It's all the pesticides and the rodenticides that are being used by these illegal grows. And so sure enough, he's accompanied by a law enforcement team anytime he goes out to do his work, because of the illegal grows that are taking place. That'll come here. There's already people approaching landowners to cultivate marijuana on their land.
Here in Oklahoma, because we have a bunch of people that tell us this on a regular basis.
Yeah, and so that's a problem. And so everybody, the myth is that, hey, legalize it, tax it, make it safe, and all the crime goes away. Well, the opposite is happening in California and Colorado. What's happening is the cartels, California, Oregon. California.
It's all the states, yeah.
Yeah. So what's happening is the cartels that typically grow, acres and acres of marijuana historically in Mexico, well, they have to pay for harvest, they have to pay for transport, smuggling, all the way into the United States and through the United States. Well, now what they're doing is they're they're still controlling through other criminal enterprises in the United States they already have connections with, they already do business with, and they're hiring them, and they're going on public lands, and there's a lot of public lands in Colorado and California, and they're planting these grows that they're not illegal to have. They're on illegal lands. So you've got the pesticides that go along with that. They're booby trapping their grow sites. They're sending people out there to watch it. Crime is going up more and more. Violent crime, property crime, it's going up. So actually in Colorado, where DEA was really not working a lot of marijuana cases because we're concentrating on methamphetamine and opioids, they're working 3 times the amount of marijuana cases now. And in California, the only law enforcement angle they can have to deal with these grows, with these pesticides, is on environmental issues. And so and I don't think the pictures are on here, but what's being left behind are very similar to what we used to see with the meth labs in Oklahoma. They're leaving back a toxic waste dump site, only with methamphetamine. Law enforcement pays to clean that up. We clean that up. With marijuana, they don't clean it up because it's legal. So there's a problem. And then this particular biologist, Brad Gabriel is his name, if you want to Google. He grew up in Humboldt County, California, and he says, I'm kind of concerned. I'm a hunter, and I'm wondering now if this stuff's in the food chain. So he tested 10 deer, 10 white-tailed deer. 7 of them came back positive for carbofur. And this stuff's so potent, 1/8 of a teaspoon will kill a bear, full-grown bear. And so that's the problem. So it doesn't get rid of the crime, it increased crime in these other states.
In fact, in Oregon recently, the U.S. Attorney came out and has basically said, we need to do something else because there is an overglut of marijuana on the streets, and so nobody's bothering to go pay for it through taxes. And these grows that he's talking about in California, they don't have licenses. They're not contributing to this tax structure that's supposed to actually save the schools that you all are hearing about. They go underground because the taxes are 27%, so they don't bother to pay it. It's easier to just go buy from this guy down the street because the police aren't going to do anything about it because it's basically not a crime. And even the crime that they have left, it's like this, $400 fine. It's not worth it. They've got other things to do.
Next slide. Well, go back. I'm sorry. I just can't see. Health risk, okay. Yeah, we used to have about, if y'all don't mind me walking around, we used to have about 4 slides of nothing but health risks associated with marijuana, and what we're doing, the audience is like, move on, move on, move on. So we kind of picked out some of the ones that jumped out at us. And one of them, the important one, and it's a problem, is because this is becoming more of a problem in the states where marijuana is legalized, is the prenatal exposure. So pregnant women are smoking marijuana. Because again, when you normalize something and when you tell everybody it's medicinal, then why not take it? I mean, why not use it, right? They're not telling them what it really does. So, and the effect is these children are being born with smaller heads, and then they're having problems with childhood development, cognitive, memory, behavioral problems later on in school. And that's the same even as in adolescence, because and this is proven over and over through medical studies. Kids that are adolescents, users of marijuana during their adolescence, teens, all the way up till your brain matures, which is between 20 and 25 years old. If you're using, they call heavy marijuana use 3 times a week. Okay, these kids in Colorado are smoking marijuana at least 3 times a day. And so what happens, it changes your brain chemistry. It rewires your brain. And so these kids are having cognitive issues, and it's tested, they've been tested on an average lower IQ of 6 to 8 points, and they're more apt to become addicted not only to marijuana, but later on, since marijuana is the gateway drug to other harder drugs, these kids are more apt to move on to harder drugs, because after a while, the marijuana just doesn't do it anymore. They're already in a group of people that are using drugs. They graduate to methamphetamine, cocaine, opioids, heroin. Now, a lot of your opioid addicts, because we'll get this thrown at us, well, opioid addicts, I thought that was pain pills. They got people addicted to opioids and heroin. Well, they're right, but still, 70% of drug addicts today started with marijuana. And alcohol, too. Alcohol, tobacco, it's all the same, but marijuana is the one that's illegal, and it's still the gateway drug. and it affects these kids' ability to learn, ability to be successful. And you know what we usually say is, kids have it tough enough right now with alcohol, with opioids, and the high school that my son went to, he could have gotten, and this was Edmond North High School, he could have gotten any drug he wanted, pills to heroin. And he knew kids that were addicted to heroin and pain pills in high school. You know, these kids don't have a chance, and they've got so many things working against them. You know, with social media, everything they do is on social media the next day. So, you know, where we used to do something and get the principal would paddle us and send us home, the biggest fear I had was my dad finding out about it, right? So there's no doubt in my mind that these kids are under a lot of anxiety, and they think that marijuana will help that. So they're turning to something else to help ease the social pressures that they're under. Well, this isn't it. This is not their way out. This is their way to become addicted to harder drugs. And there was a study just recently that says in the states where marijuana is legalized, 1 in 4 high school students will smoke marijuana, and then 1 in 6 will become addicted.
In my juvenile court docket, I'll just tell you that one of the things I've learned over the years, and I've talked to many, many psychologists and doctors and everything else, and you know, while I've done this, but when kids under 18 start smoking pot at a young age, they never learn to deal with stress and emotional issues, because you know, those things continue on when if you remember back when you were a kid, there's issues that go on at school that you're completely stressed out, but that's part of going to school is you learn how to deal with stress, with anger. I frequently have kids that come to court after they've gotten into a fight at school, assault and battery, and I tell them, you know, there's a lot of people I'd really like to hit, but I can't, and neither can you. That's not part of dealing with society and learning. And so when they start turning to marijuana as a young kid, they never learn to deal with that stress. Their outlet for stress, because I ask them, I go, why are you smoking pot? Well, because I have stress. So their outlet for stress is marijuana. And then it becomes something else. Then it becomes pills. Then it can become meth. That's how they go up that scale, because they never learn to deal with that stress without drugs. And so that's really, really important and something that we really worry about.
And then the people that we end up arresting later on, you know, in their late 20s, 30s, 40s. I mean, most of the traffickers we go after, they're dealers, they're transporters, but they're users. So a lot of even in the traffic fatalities, they'll have methamphetamine, cocaine, or heroin in their system. Well, guess what else they have in their system? Most of the time, they also have marijuana in their systems. They never stop using marijuana, they just move on to heavier drugs. But marijuana is always that staple that they always go back to. Go ahead, next slide. Go ahead and do the next slide. This is it.
They don't matter.
So one of the things that we keep hearing is, oh, this is supposed to help epileptic kids. Well, this is actually the doctor who's head of the American Society on Epilepsy. His name is Michael Primatera, and what he says is, and he writes this letter, and if you look on the internet, the letter gets updated on a regular basis based on, you know, whatever research is going on. But he has an experience, and he says, we are telling general doctors not to go just automatic, and parents not to just go automatically go to the store and get CBD oil and put it on the kids. And here's why. A big part of it is that it is unregulated. And so, like Rich said earlier, you've always heard about the people who go out and they take the water bottles and they pour water in them from their hoses and they sell it as purified water. Same kind of thing. You don't know what's in the CBD oil. And if it has a high level of THC in it, then it can really harm the kid. So this doctor actually has had many, many cases where he's had to go and put kids in a coma because of something that they've been treated with CBD oil that has, either having pesticides in it or it has a high level of THC that has caused them to go into convulsions and other seizures that he's had to try to put them in a coma to get them out of. So for everyone that says, oh, the Epilepsy Society says this is a good thing, this guy is the president of it. He's saying no. He's saying be careful and cautious and don't just automatically do that because it's not necessarily a good thing. Hopefully, when the FDA approves Epidiolex, that'll be a different story.
Next slide. Okay, this is Colorado, and we're kind of bumbling around here because the slides are really not what we're used to in this order. But so here's what you walk into a medical marijuana shop in Colorado, and you've got a guy in a lab coat, and people will come in there and say, well, what's your problem? Well, I got a headache. Well, this particular brand here will solve your headache. Well, I've got glaucoma. Well, this right here will fix your glaucoma. And we've got some video footage of them saying, no, it really don't matter. They're just taking it from one glass and putting it in the other. And then we had another video of some kids that were they looked like they were 18, but they were probably 21 because they had to be 21 to get a license in a medical license in Colorado. But so there was a reporter in there that said, "Hey, so what ailment do you have where you have to base the reason why you have a medical marijuana card?" He goes, and they started laughing. So the kids started laughing, and they said, "Oh yeah, I have anxiety." The other kid had something else, and they're laughing the whole time. And so I read an article in the paper about some of the other lawyers in the state that are for this. I guess did an interview with the Tulsa Press and said that the opponents of this are coming out and saying that this is not a medicinal marijuana bill. Well, that's what we're saying, and we'll stick with that. This is a recreational bill disguised as a medicinal bill, and for those reasons, because in California you get a medical marijuana card on the beach. You go to a booth and get you a medical marijuana card, and they'll say, well, no, they'll say, but a certified physician has to give you this card. He bases his reputation on that. And it's like, and our response is, it's working so well with opioids. Because, I mean, my agency and her agency, we work bad doctors. And just like any profession, 99% of them are good and trying to do the right thing and help people. Well, there's always that small percentage that are in it for the money. And that's what I say, always follow the money. And so that's what's going on. And they're going to make, I don't know what the charge will be, but they're going to make money. They're going to be handing out medical marijuana cards, and the word will spread on, hey, if you want a card, you can get it from this doctor. And if they have a DEA license to prescribe medication, and they recommend marijuana, then I guarantee you DEA is coming after them, and they won't be prescribing any medications. And until the Attorney General, God bless Jeff Sessions, until he leaves, for whatever reason, in the future, he's given us our marching orders, and that is to enforce the marijuana laws, which we'll do federally. Okay, marijuana versus tobacco. This was a great video, and hopefully it'll play. I don't think it will. It might. So we looked at it. We looked at marijuana versus tobacco, knowing that tobacco's killed more people than anything in the world, more than World War I and World War II combined. Okay, but everybody will say, but it's legal. Yeah, it's legal. And if opium was legal, it'd kill a bunch of people too. And so we looked at it, and so marijuana contains 33 cancer-causing chemicals, 50 to 70% higher than tobacco. Okay, so there was a gentleman that was challenging Susan in one of the presentations that she was doing, and and what it is they try to come at you from an emotional standpoint, because whenever you make an emotional argument, it'll always overshadow the facts, no matter what. It usually does. And so he came out and said, he tells the story. He goes, I had a friend that had cancer, and I talked him into going. I tried to talk him into going to Colorado to cure his cancer by smoking marijuana, and he wouldn't do it, and he died. And I'll never let that happen again to another friend of mine. And so he starts telling this story. And, it's so bad I want to say, well, I don't know what kind of cancer he had, but those are carcinogens. Those are cancer-causing chemicals, 50 to 70% higher than tobacco. So 4 times as much tar as tobacco. 5 times, and carbon monoxide, and then the ammonia levels are 20 times higher. The hydrogen cyanide levels in marijuana are 3 to 5 times higher than tobacco. And so and not only that, I mean, how many other medications do you smoke? I don't know. I've never heard of a medication that you smoke to ingest it. THC is already legal in a pill called Marinol. It's synthetic THC. And so a lot of the proponents will get up and say, you know what? And we had a lady actually the other night in Weatherford. We were talking to a church. And she came in there fully in support of medical marijuana. And she said her brother has AIDS. He's a long-time survivor of AIDS. And she said he needed his marijuana because it's wasting. It causes him to get hungry, and he would eat and he would put on weight. And that's great. That's a one-off thing. And if this guy he's dying, if he needs marijuana to put on weight, that's fine. But Marinol was approved. Synthetic THC was approved in the late 80s for that reason, to treat those symptoms. And so I don't think she knew that, but I'll tell you what, at the end of the presentation that we gave in Weatherford, she had changed her mind. And that was somebody who has a brother who's dying of AIDS. So that kind of made us feel good that she And she was very nice, she was very well behaved throughout the whole thing.
I wish that video would have played. It's actually a video that a kid put together that shows, I think it was 40 packs of cigarettes.
300 cigarettes.
Right. And it just showed all the tar coming out of it in a bottle. And you know, when you start thinking about that, and you think how much higher it is for marijuana, because there's no filters, and it's, you know, even absent the marijuana, the smoking part by itself is really, really hazardous and dangerous.
Yeah, that science. If you guys want a great science project for your teenage kid, this is, I don't know who did this. Kid was smart. But so he takes a glass globe, puts a hole in it that a cigarette goes on, and puts a vacuum pump on the back of it, and they fill the globe up with cotton balls to represent your lungs. Okay, and so he runs 300 cigarettes through it, and when they're done, the cotton balls are all brown and wet. I don't know what they're wet and they're brown. The globe is black, and then so they pull that out and they smear the cotton balls all over a piece of white paper, and brown liquid comes out. I don't know what that liquid is, but then they started cutting open the tubes and running their fingers through it, and almost kind of like in the palm of their hand, tar, just black tar with like thick motor oil, and it's a really great visual. If I was a cigarette smoker before I watched that, I wouldn't be after I watched it. So if nothing else, through these 26 presentations, I think we saved some lives just off the smoke of tobacco. Go ahead and next slide. This is we've talked about this.
So if you think back, and I think a lot of people here are at least as old as we are, we started looking back, and unfortunately we don't have the slide for it, but if you look back at some of the old smoking ads, we've really found some that were kind of funny. I say funny, they're sad. One of them was one from the 30s where it was asthma cigarettes. If you smoked the cigarettes, that it would help your asthma. We found a pregnant woman smoking, and it was basically, this is the choice of pregnant women that's good for your baby. So the point of that is that this is the same kind of sale that the tobacco people did years ago. Smoking is good for you. It's glamorous. It's going to fix all these things. It's a cure-all. And that's what you keep hearing from this, you know, the proponents of marijuana. It's going to fix this. It's going to cure this, all of these things. Same thing with the opioids. When they first came out, oh, they're not addictive and they're going to cure all the pain. And now we have the opioid lawsuit, which is just like the tobacco lawsuit.
And you guys, and another video we used to play was a clip from the Josie Wales show. Remember the Western where he was on the ferry and the guy in the white suit comes out and he notices that Josie's partner's been shot. He says, oh, I can see your young friend there is in need of some medical attention. I have this bottle and it'll cure anything that ails you. And so Josie Wales spits on him. That's how those snake oil salesmen of the 1800s were. That's what they did. They pushed products that were sold, that were said to cure everything. It just first tell them what ails you, and then they'll tell you it cures you. Well, that's the same marketing scheme we're seeing with CBD and marijuana, because we're keeping track of all of the ailments now. And listen, they come out with new ailments that it cures every week. So I think we're up to about 65 ailments that marijuana either cures or treats. And I'm like, well, that's a miracle. I don't know why the pharmaceutical industries haven't just stopped making all the other medications, just start using marijuana.
GW Pharmaceuticals is.
And so it's like the 1800s, and CBD was around in the 1800s. You could buy CBD in the 1800s, cannabidiol. And so the pharmaceutical industry had over 100 years to look at this and determine if it cures anything. And just in the 1800s, it's known to have a somewhat moderate effect for these epileptic kids. That's a good thing. We're happy for that. And if people would just let the FDA do their job, and that's what the FDA does. They were created in 1937 to make sure that the medication and the food that are put on the market in the United States is safe and effective, and that the benefits outweigh any risks. And it's not perfect, but it's the best in the world. But all of a sudden now we are deciding what's medication by popular vote. You know, and I know how it happened. And when you study this and you look at how it happened, you can see. And the people, the billionaires, and the industry that started this is like, they need to use the media to convince people that it is medicinal. And once you do that, you'll be down the road. And now they've been successful now in 29 or 30 states. And but what's interesting is we always knew it'd be a failed science experiment. We just didn't know if it could ever turn back the clock, right? And it will eventually. They'll turn back the clock, even if it passes. But because of Colorado, well, the last several states in the Northeast, I think it's 4 or 5 states, they've rejected legalizing marijuana
This year.
in the last 6 months. And you got to look at what's going on in these states. You talk about an opioid crisis. Their morgues are filling up every day, and they have to have refrigerated trucks outside the morgues to take the overflow. It's unbelievable what's happening in Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. They're double the overdose deaths that Oklahoma is having, and Oklahoma is higher than the national average. And so they're saying, we've had enough, we're done, we're losing too many of our people to overdose deaths. Why legalize something that's going to create more drug addicts?
Another myth that's come out that you all will hear is that, well, let's have them smoke marijuana so they'll get off of opioids and we'll stop the opioid deaths. Well, there's some new stats that came out, I think, in the last week or two, and I can't remember. Brian Server may be able to remember them. But basically, in the states where it's been legalized, Colorado is the one specific one, that their opioid deaths have increased, not decreased.
And you guys can read the slide, but I'm going to read it for you anyway. Science has established, because people love to argue with us about this slide. Science has established that when children develop a substance use disorder at a young age, it increases the likelihood of an addiction to another substance. That is just the plain, cold truth, regardless of whether people like it or not. That's the truth. And then you can see the pie chart there. The big green part is those are the people that specific first use would be marijuana. And it should be right around 70% of the stats I read yesterday are correct. Next slide. Colorado claims. Okay, so we pulled some stats from Colorado. There's a report out there that Rocky Mountain High to high-intensity drug trafficking. It's actually a ONDCP program, and they are keeping track of all of these stats. They're not creating the stats. They're just pulling the stats from all of the different agencies and organizations, and they're compiling it into a report that you guys can pull up on the internet. And so right now, last year Colorado was the highest in the state for adolescent marijuana use. Well, they went down to number 2. So I think somebody giving a presentation said they're the highest, and somebody in the crowd jumped on them and said they're not the highest. Well, they're still 74% higher. Colorado's 74% higher than the national average. That's pretty high.
Because it's legal.
So what they're seeing in Colorado, we had some troopers there 4 or 5 weeks ago now. They had a conference, and I asked them, I said, because one of the troopers works for me in my task force, I said, hey, would you please go? I said, because we're hearing about homeless, panhandlers. We're hearing, people are rude. That you can't walk down the street without getting some panhandler coming up to you wanting your money. And then when you don't give them any, they get very aggressive because they're not your 56-year-old, 50 or 60-year-old homeless that life is beaten down. These kids are between their 20s and 30s, and they're rather aggressive. And so they went and they brought us some pictures, and I hope they're on this next slide. But they brought us some pictures of exactly that. Taken with their, is Branson Perry here? Hey Branson, were you there? Okay, so Branson was out there. They sent some pictures of these homeless folks, and they're set up all the way down the street because they have to set up in public lands. Yeah, there's the pictures. This is pictures that one of the troopers sent to us. The guy on the bottom left is shooting heroin, and right there in the open sidewalk there. And then the others are just homeless people that are setting up camp. They've come to Colorado to smoke dope and get high, and they do. And so their routine is they get up in the morning and they get high. It's a group effort deal. They get high, and so you've got the social services in Denver are taking care of them to the extent they're feeding them, and they have shelters. The shelters are full, but they're feeding them. And in the warm weather, the kids are fine because they're kids, right? To them, it's camping, and so they get high. They go. They're fed a meal. They come back. They take a nap. They get high. They go eat their afternoon meal for free, and then later on in the evening they get high again. And it's over and over and over. And so this is what Colorado's seeing, and the crime rate has gone up. The crime rate's actually the reason that the governor is considering outlawing marijuana completely, banning marijuana completely, because while the national crime rate, property and violent crime rate's going down, Colorado's is going up.
So when I told you earlier tonight, go home and Google Durango and homeless, what's happened in Durango is it's a nicer town, and the business people there are fed up with the homeless people because the homeless people will come around, they panhandle, and they're aggressive panhandlers. They go in the stores, they commit petty larceny, steal money, go out and buy their marijuana, get high, go to the homeless shelter. They now have signs all over the town that says, don't give to the homeless, give to a shelter instead. So they enacted a panhandling ordinance, and the ACLU came in and sued them, so they've had to undo some of that. And the business people are just, I mean, there's a really good article when you Google Durango, Colorado, and homeless that'll tell you really the business people there are really tired of it, and they want them gone. How many people have been to Colorado Springs lately? Okay. I went there about a year and a half ago because one of my friends decided to get married, and we went there, and I was with another friend, and we went to go try to find something to eat after 6 p.m. And we couldn't hardly find, there was like 1 or 2 restaurants open. And so we go, what's the deal? And they said, well, that most of the restaurants there will not be open after 6 p.m. because the homeless people that are so aggressive come there and they harass the patrons, and it's just, they feel like it's dangerous at night. And if you Google or YouTube some of the homeless stories in Colorado, there's one in particular that I can remember that we had on a video at one point where the panhandler gets out and starts taking a pipe to people who won't pay him, who won't give him money. And so they basically have shut down their businesses because of the homeless people.
Next slide. Okay, so Colorado's schools report 19% increase in suspensions due to marijuana. That doesn't factor in the dropout rate that's increasing there, high school dropout rate. Next slide.
It also just has citation.
So traffic deaths related to marijuana when the driver tested positive for marijuana. Now, if you see the green arrow, that was legalization. You had commercialization, I'm sorry, you had medical marijuana first in Colorado. Then you had commercialization in 2009. And you can see after commercialization, the traffic fatality rates, marijuana related, started going up. And then you look at 2013, when Colorado legalized recreational marijuana, you can see the spike. And that's drivers that tested positive, was 66% increase in traffic fatalities. Next slide. Marijuana only exposures reported. That is when parents or people called the state poison control board hotline, the state poison control hotline. And again, you can see legalization 2013 and then the spike. And it's usually, those calls are usually kids that have taken in too much THC and they're hallucinating, heart rate's up, and so the parents don't know what to do. The first thing they do is call the poison control hotline. And I'm going to tell you, there's nothing they can do. There's nothing that the physicians can do to bring that heart rate down. I know this kid that was there, he had, they gave him 4 IVs of something, I don't know what it was, and basically told the parent that that's all we can do. That's all we can do. It's got to run. It's got to clean out of his system. Hooked him up to IVs and just waiting.
All of our stats came from national studies, National Institute of Health, SAMHSA, Substance Abuse Services, Rocky Mountain High Report. Whenever you read something about some stat about how marijuana cures everything, look at the bottom and look at its resource, because a lot of times it's marijuana.org or something like that.
Yeah, I'm glad this slide's here. It's because a lot of times we spend our time debunking myths. A lot of times it's on social media. I jumped into a social media discussion that the news put out a few weeks ago, and man, they jumped on me as 100 to 1. I felt like Mr. Trump.
You're about like him.
Anyway, so one of the myths I think we talked about, opioid use is down in states that have gone legal. It's the opposite. It's up. And it makes perfect sense because marijuana is a gateway drug that introduces kids to harder drugs. You can't overdose on marijuana. We talked about that. If you go to the hospital, if you're causing the poison control board, someone's overdosed on marijuana. And then you look at 2005, 149 teens admitted for marijuana use, to 2015, 639 teens. And in between, in the middle of that, was 2013 when marijuana was legalized recreationally. Marijuana users are clogging our prisons. I love this one. Even the former Speaker of the House, Bonner, was it Joe Bonner? I can't remember his first name. He's now working for the marijuana industry, and he came out trying to push forward a national legalization of marijuana, and we need to empty out our prisons. Well, less than 1% of state and federal prisons have inmates in there that are there for marijuana charges, and if they are, I guarantee you they're there for other charges, and marijuana was just one of them, because I've been in DEA 28 years. I've never once booked somebody for simple possession of marijuana. Now, if they're driving a truckload of it across the states, then they'll go to jail. Okay, but that's it. It's not. It's just a false myth that they're putting out. And, you know, when the state passed by ballot the state question 780 and 781, remember, we made possession of all drugs in the state a misdemeanor, regardless of how many times they get arrested with cocaine and heroin and methamphetamine. Every single time, if it's not delivery distribution, it's a misdemeanor. And that was supposed to clear out our prisons. Well, guess what? They clear out our prisons. So, but they sell this stuff to the public listens to it, and then they vote. They vote their, you know, what they think is the truth. That's why we're out here, because there's not many people out there telling the truth about this. That's kind of something that I feel is our job to do. It's the government's job. But a lot of the chiefs are worried about doing that, chiefs and sheriffs, because there's a state law that says they can't lobby one way or another for legislation or candidates. Well, you know, and the people come to me, I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm doing the same thing I've done for 32 years. I'm educating the people about marijuana, about drugs. And so I'll continue to do that. And so will Susan. Meth is a non-violent drug.
It's a myth.
So a lot of times they'll say, you know, people that have high anxiety, you know, if they smoke dope, it'll calm them down to commit some of these crimes. Well, you guys all know who Chris Kyle was. He was the guy depicted in the movie Sniper. Well, the guy that killed him, Eddie Ray Ruth, he got high that morning, and it was cold-blooded, premeditated murder before he went out and murdered Chris Kyle. Next slide. Andrew, I can't remember his last name, Steven Zorn. I don't know this guy, but I was in a conference in Nashville about marijuana, and it was a Kentucky State Trooper that gave me this slide because this was a friend of his that went to the Middle East, did his time as a service, came back, had PTSD. Okay, he had some problems. He was seeing some bad things, and he had some problems. This is what's happening to a lot of our servicemen. And so, next slide. Here's his suicide note. Okay, here was his suicide note. Because he was self-medicating with marijuana. He was smoking dope, thinking that would take care of his PTSD. And that's his note. You guys can read it. He was done. He thinks marijuana had a lot to do with how he got to committing suicide. And I don't know many people that lie on their suicide notes. Next slide.
Because he had PTSD.
This is the, so talk about that, Paul.
So whenever they wrote this initiative petition, they basically closed loopholes that had been written out in every other state. And this is one of the loopholes in another state. It wasn't a loophole. Colorado basically allows every city and county to opt out by doing another vote of the people to opt out of having marijuana be legal. This is a map of Colorado, and 66% of their counties have now opted out since it became legal recreational in 2013. That should tell you something. We have no such provision currently in this law as written.
And that's intentional because we're state number 30, I believe, might be 31. But in each state, it's the same people writing these language in these ballots. It's the ACLU writing this, and they're probably being paid pretty well by those millionaires.
Oh my God.
And so when you look at the language is pretty similar state by state, except in each state, successive state, they close loopholes. Like the loophole where Colorado citizens by a county or municipality can opt out. Well, they closed that loop for Oklahoma. They also said that you can't go after a doctor so a reasonable and prudent doctor that gives a recommendation for someone to smoke marijuana, and nowhere else in the law that they have a get out of jail free card. So there's one written into this Oklahoma ballot that they can't be, what's the word? They can't be discriminated against or penalized.
There's a statute part in here that says that they cannot be denied a state license. So there's a letter. It's not on this slide set, but we have a letter that's on another slide that it basically was sent out to all of the gun dealers, and it says that when you fill out your application to get a gun, you have to put, are you addicted to any substance? Well, and there was a specific letter that came out and said, if you have a medical marijuana card, we consider you to be addicted. So a gun dealer, under federal law, has to ask and let them fill that out. If they fill that part out, they're not allowed to sell them a weapon. Well, under this initiative petition, the state state law will now say that they're not, that the gun dealer is not allowed to deny them a license for a gun, not allowed to deny a medical person for a medical license. So arguably a doctor can do surgery and be addicted to marijuana, and the board can do nothing about it. You cannot ban them from having, the only thing you can do is ban them from having the marijuana on property at their work and smoking at work. But that doesn't mean they can't leave at lunch and go get high and come back. And the employers can't do anything about it. There's some serious problems with it. So those are a lot of the issues that come up with, there's a lot of, that's part of the little loopholes with the licensing. It says you cannot deny anybody a state license, and several little parts. And that's all loopholes that they close from other states.
And it's going to create a lot of conflict because it's already in conflict with several laws, including federal laws like the gun deal. Well, ATF can come in there, and if they've got a person that's got a medical marijuana card, they can't possess or sell or purchase a gun. Well, federally, ATF can still go after them and arrest them because they lied on the form, or take their guns or whatever it might be. But to go back to how we started, and the Oklahoma ballot language, they preempted all these things. They built in a safety net that's going to create a lot of lawsuits around the state. Florida's seeing this because there's a child that they wanted to be able to smoke marijuana. She has a medical marijuana necessity. And
At school.
So the school said, no, you can't do that. Well, she's suing, and I don't know if it's been adjudicated yet, but she's suing the school. There's another lady that wanted to smoke marijuana in public at a public restaurant. The restaurant said, no, we have no smoking. We have a smoking ban, statewide smoking ban. So she has now sued the state, saying, no, I've got a medical need, I've got my medical license, and I can take my medicine anywhere I want. And so far, I've read, I'm keeping up with the case, she looks like she's winning. So you go back to, okay, what trumps what? Does the smoking ban in the state trump the vote of the people?
Whenever they wrote this initiative petition, they basically closed loopholes that had been written out in every other state. And this is one of the loopholes in another state. It wasn't a loophole. Colorado basically allows every city and county to opt out by doing another vote of the people to opt out of having marijuana be legal. This is a map of Colorado, and 66% of their counties have now opted out since it became legal recreational in 2013. That should tell you something. We have no such provision currently in this law as written.
And that's intentional because we're state number 30, I believe. It might be 31. But in each state, it's the same people writing the language in these ballots. It's the ACLU writing this. And they're probably being paid pretty well by those millionaires. And so if you look at the language is pretty similar state by state, except in each state, successive state, they close loopholes. Like the loophole where Colorado citizens by a county or municipality can opt out. Well, they closed that loop for Oklahoma. They also said that you can't go after a doctor. So a reasonable and prudent doctor that gives a recommendation for someone to smoke marijuana. And nowhere else in the law do they have a get-out-of-jail-free card. So there's one written into this Oklahoma ballot that they can't be, what's the word? They can't be discriminated against or penalized.
There's a statute part in here that says that they cannot be denied a state license. So there's a letter, and it's not on this slide set, but we have a letter that's on another slide, that it basically was sent out to all of the gun dealers, and it says that when you fill out your application to get a gun, you have to put, are you addicted to any substance? Well, and there was a specific letter that came out and said, if you have a medical marijuana card, we consider you to be addicted. So a gun dealer, under federal law, has to ask and let them fill that out. If they fill that part out, they're not allowed to sell them a weapon. Well, under this initiative petition, the state law will now say that that the gun dealer is not allowed to deny them a license for a gun. Not allowed to deny a medical person for a medical license. So arguably a doctor can do surgery and be addicted to marijuana, and the board can do nothing about it. You cannot ban them from having, the only thing you can do is ban them from having the marijuana on property at their work and smoking at work. But that doesn't mean they can't leave at lunch and go get high and come back. And the employers can't do anything about it. There's some serious problems with it. So those are a lot of the issues that come up with. There's a lot of that's part of the little loopholes with the licensing. It says you cannot deny anybody a state license, and several little parts, and that's all loopholes that they've closed from other states.
And it's going to create a lot of conflict because it's already in conflict with several laws, including federal laws like the gun deal. Well, ATF can come in there, and if they've got a person that's got a medical marijuana card, they can't possess or sell or purchase a gun. Well, federally, ATF can still go after them and arrest them because they've lied on a form or take their guns or whatever it might be. But to go back to how we started, and the Oklahoma ballot language, they've preempted all these things. They've built in a safety net that's going to create a lot of lawsuits around the state. Florida's seeing this because there's a child that they wanted to be able to smoke marijuana. She has a medical marijuana necessity. And
At school.
So the school said, no, you can't do that. Well, she's suing, and I don't know if it's been adjudicated yet, but she's suing the school. There's another lady that wanted to smoke marijuana in public at a public restaurant. The restaurant said, no, we have no smoking. We have a smoking ban, statewide smoking ban. So she has now sued the state, saying, no, I've got a medical need, I've got my medical license, and I can take my medicine anywhere I want. And so far, I've read, I'm keeping up with the case, she looks like she's winning. So you go back to, okay, what trumps what? Does the smoking ban in the state trump the vote of the people ballot language? And I travel around, not a lot, but a good bit. And about 1 out of every 3 hotels I stay in, I have to move hotel room. I have to move my room because somebody on my floor is smoking marijuana, and it's not like tobacco; it permeates throughout the whole. I don't know if you guys have smelt it, but I've had to leave. I've had to go get a room on the floor. So I don't know what the hotels are going to do.
So what will happen is you'll have somebody that'll come in and they'll try to buy a license from a local gun dealer, and they're going to say, no, you filled this out, and so I can't sell you a gun. Well, under state law, they said you can't deny them, so they're going to go sue the gun dealer in state court. Then they'll have to get removed to federal court, and federal court at that point, the law will trump state law, but nevertheless, you're still going to have those lawsuits. And during these meetings we've had with the health department, one of the things that they've said by talking to a couple of the other states is that they had to hire, and I can't remember exactly which state, they had to hire 7 assistant attorney generals just to deal with the marijuana lawsuits, because anything that you try to prohibit, and arguably the legislators can come in and try to do some statutory changes, and there's other issues with that. We have Senator Quinn here. He can talk about what happened after they tried to come back and change any of the language in 780 or 781. But even if you do, they're still going to come back and sue and go, well, that's not what the people voted for. They voted for this, and they knew what they were voting for by reading this little bitty part on this ballot.
And so in Colorado, this is some of the business fronts that they have. There's more McDonald's, Starbucks, and 7-Eleven stores now in Colorado than there are. There's more than there are McDonald's and Starbucks. So there's more medical or more marijuana stores, dispensaries, than there are McDonald's, Starbucks, and 7-Eleven stores. And so the next slide, I think, shows it up on a map. So I'm sure there's some schools close by there, but that's what it looks like. And so when you think about your community, and we're seeing them in Oklahoma City, they're actually some of these CBD shops these CBD shops think they can sell marijuana. They're not going to be able to sell marijuana. Not unless
the health department rules get it.
If the health department rules. But they basically setting up shop. There's a lot of money going into this on the front end. They're just waiting for this ballot to come through, whether it passes to open their doors. But
this particular slide was a mom who wanted to get the marijuana out of her county, and so she put this out and she said, please vote to get this out of and not legal in our county longer, and put all these shops to show everybody how many that there were in their small county.
Next slide. And we talked about this. So this was the plan from '93. I think I've already gone through it. But I think the one on the very bottom, Peter Lewis, was a billionaire, one of the billionaires, and now he runs or backs the Marijuana Policy Project. And Susan talked about some of the labs, some of these private labs that are set up to test for
THC.
The THC levels of legitimate marijuana. Well, if you look at some of these labs, they're owned and supported by the Marijuana Policy Project. And I don't think the basically the quote on the bottom is, that's George Soros. He's the biggest backer. It was his idea. It was his strategy to go after marijuana legalization by using medicinal as a front, as a springboard to full legalization. And that's his quote at the bottom of this video. If it were to play, it says, I'm basically there to make money. I cannot and do not look at the social consequences of what I do. He's a billionaire. He wants to make money. He wants a new tobacco industry. Go ahead, next one. This is the amounts of money that, and the timeline that these billionaires have put. Remember I told you they came up with this strategy in '93? Well, from '96 to 2009, Soros, Lewis, and Sperling put in $15.7 million of their own money. Now, billionaires don't invest in something that they don't have a plan for. And then total legalization proponents, so they were able to get another $2 million back before when marijuana first started, this initiative first started. And that was for 14 states. And then if you look at the money that the opponents were able to raise to combat this, they were only able to raise $1.8 million. And that has been repeated over and over and over in every state. And if you look at the last 6 years, you see the change where Soros, Sperling, and Lewis put in 80% of the money towards legalization. Now they're putting in 35% since up to 2016. And you've had a marijuana industry now behind them that's putting in the rest of the money to $227 million for 16 states, and the opponents were able to raise $32 million. That's why they're winning right there. That is their game plan. That's why they're winning. That's why Susan and I are out talking about this 3 times a week. Because the only ways to let people know or to counter the myths that are out there, honestly, if you want to vote for it, there's nothing I can do. But I'd like people to be informed and educated on what they're voting for. And they're not going to get that from anywhere else because there is some, I've seen some commercials out there. I think there was $500,000 raised within the state to combat it. But they'll outspend that 10 to 1.
So one of the myths I heard this morning on one of the radio ads that the other side's playing is basically vote for this because it's going to save our schools. Well, I don't want to put words in Senator Quinn's mouth. He's here, he can speak for himself. But I can tell you that last year the budget analysts at the state figured out that they do not expect it to even make any money or even break even for the first 3 years. Especially considering all of the rules that they're wanting to enact to at least try to make some sort of level of safety, and how many new employees it's going to take, how much infrastructure it's going to take. And the way this is written, it's supposed to go into effect within about 90 days after it's voted on. And so they're trying to get things together to do that, but they're estimating at least 3 years. So at 3 years point, and then you have taxes on top of it, then you get to a point where you go backwards after saturation, which has happened in Oregon in about 5 years, where people are not even bothering to pay taxes on it. They're just going to buy it illegally because they can save themselves 27%. And that's what you're looking at.
And then I told you guys about the Richard Cowell Cohen. You guys might, I had a difficult time finding this on the internet. The guy in Nashville gave it to me, but this was the guy that George Soros came to and said, if you do this my way, I'll fund it. Well, here's the quote of him saying this as the video was playing. And he says the key to it, and this was back in the early, I don't know if it's 93 or 94, some early 90s, but he says the key to it is full legalization is medical access, because once you have hundreds of thousands of people using marijuana medically under medical supervision, the whole scam is going to be blown. The consensus here is that medical marijuana is our strongest suit. That was their strategy, and that's him saying it. I wish that video would play, and they've carried it out now in 30 states with strong funding on the back end. And I didn't know this. I didn't know a lot of the things that what we're talking about today until I started researching it. And Susan and I spent a lot of nights with piles of paper and a lot of research. We would research all during the day when we weren't doing our regular jobs, and then come together in the evening and put it out. And so I've learned a lot. And so
we still learn stuff because we have a little thread of people that email us stuff on a regular basis, and Brian's one of them.
Yeah,
and
we recognize Brian.
Yes.
I want to recognize Brian Serber. He's Joe's first assistant
district
attorney for Rogers County. And it doesn't matter what the cause is. If it's the right thing, Brian's always right there in front of it. And he has done more than his share of getting up and talking to the public about this. And probably there's some more people in here too that I don't see. And
one of the things I wanted to also say, because I said this in one of the previous presentations in this area, You know, this language was written by people out of state that's trying to tell people in Oklahoma what to do. And we all know that these people are going to come back if this doesn't pass us and try another round. I really believe at this point, and I've talked to many legislators, that if it doesn't pass, then they're going to try to come back with something more reasonable. And let Oklahoma legislators try to resolve this instead of somebody from out of state shoving something down our throat, because it makes a huge difference in what's going to happen in Oklahoma in the next 5 years. We're going to lose a generation of kids.
And the reason they're doing these ballots, these votes to the people, because they can manipulate them through the media. Whereas the states, if they're trying to do this through legislation, are not passing. So they'll come back to this to try to do it through votes to the people, ballot initiatives. There's a science behind what they're doing. And so all we're going to do is keep on talking about it. If it passes, I have a lot of faith in Oklahoma. I really do. And I don't see it staying. If it does pass, I think your moms out there are going to say we've had enough. And when a lot of these kids are getting kicked out of school and smoking dope and fighting with their parents now because they're rebellious, teenagers are rebellious enough as it is, then I think it will, their balance will always come back, regardless of, what form that balance will be in, but it always comes back.
I just found where Senator Quinn is. He's right over there, so raise your hand. He is one of the hardest working senators we have, so be very thankful that you have him. He's a good guy.
I think from here, Pastor, we're going to take a break, or you want to go straight to panel?
I do. Would you give them a hand? I want to start with Paul Mobley, and I'm going to try to give you an introduction. We talked about being a truth detective. We've talked about trying to, how do you identify truth? And when you hear somebody that talks, somebody writes an article, and there's from some place that you don't know, and you just assume. This is Paul Mobley here. He was Chief of Staff and Clinical Director, United States Public Health Service, Claremore Indian Hospital, Claremore, Oklahoma. He is retired. And I also thought that it was important to get people with some Oklahoma roots. He went to Ewing-Halsell High School in Veneta, Oklahoma. How many people from Veneta are in here? Anybody from Veneta? You can raise your hand. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in zoology with a minor in chemistry from the University of Oklahoma, Norman, Oklahoma. Any OU people out there? Yeah, I kind of thought you might be. He holds a Doctor of Osteopathy from Des Moines University Osteopathic Medical Center, College of Osteopathic Medicine and Surgery, Des Moines, Iowa. He was also Associate Professor of Clinical Sciences at the Oklahoma College of Osteopathic Medicine and Surgery, now known as OSU Center for Health Science in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Would you welcome Dr. Paul Mobley to the stage? Dr. Mobley, give us your perspective. You are here as to offer a medical perspective. That's something I cannot do, and I want to hear the research that you've done. I know that you've got a whole notebook. We don't have time for all that, and I know that you know that. And he's got some things written out, and if you will email me, and if you want some of the things that he's written out, we will get those to you. Dr. Mobley, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Mike. Is this mic on?
It is.
I'm not going to refute anything that you've heard already. I might elaborate on some of those things. I've basically just done some updating research in my research since I've volunteered to be on the panel. Surprisingly, a lot of my research went more into the legislative area. I would like to start out by saying I've been a member of the OOA, the Oklahoma Osteopathic Association, now for over 45 years since I've become a physician in Oklahoma, and all of my practice has been in Oklahoma. And our OOA and also the MD Medical Association have both come out in opposition to 788. I would say that I'm not on anyone's payroll, and OOA has not paid me nor anyone else for my viewpoint, including First Baptist Church. I have a kind of a different slant, however, on medical marijuana. I'm here to tell you that the United States and Oklahoma already has the legal, medical, and I'm not going to say marijuana, but it's the components, and it's been alluded to earlier by our speaker, and back in the 80s and just even recently with CBD, we've had legal THC, and now we have legal CBD cannabidiol. And so I think that this vote is unnecessary, and it's not, and I've heard it a million times already, it's not medical marijuana. I'll give you a little bit of information, and I made a little handout here just so that you can refer to that, and you don't have to take written notes right now. The Department of Justice and the Drug Enforcement Agency, DEA, has made THC and CBD legal, and these were approved, of course, by the FDA, because that's the department that approves what is class 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 5. And right now, as I stand here, marijuana is illegal in the United States, and that gives us a conundrum about passing this. I believe that it's against the law to have medical or, of course, recreational marijuana. The names of some of these I've written in my handout here, and the THC name is called Marinol and Syndrose, and these are synthetic. They're not made from the plant. CBD, cannabidiol, and you saw a picture of a bottle of Epidiolex, and that is now approved just within the last week, and but it's only the product made in the United Kingdom, and it's under strict manufacturing guidelines. It's pure, 100 milligrams per milliliter. This is for children, for the 2 types of childhood epilepsy, and primarily this will be used in hospitals where they have to know exactly what they're giving, and this isn't oral. It's similar, of course, to CBD, but it can have various strengths and also impurities. So really, that's the only one that's FDA approved, and it is a category 3, or class 3, which is similar to some of the other medications you may be very familiar with, such as Valium or Vicodin and so forth. I would like to go into a little bit on this proposed medical marijuana, which the only delivery system is smoking it. And as you've heard before, it's a lot more dangerous to smoke marijuana than it is even cigarettes, which I've taught a lot of classes on smoking cessation, and it's not necessarily the nicotine, but it's all the tar and all the other carbon monoxide and cyanide and all the other poisons that are in it. So one of the precepts physicians have, and we're taught that day one in medical school, is first do no harm. So I would have a big problem, and I think most physicians should have a problem with pushing, and that's not the right term to use for physician, recommending medical marijuana, because you're actually damaging your patient. Marijuana does cause emphysema, COPD, heart disease, and all the other problems that smoking causes. Now, THC is primarily abused for the euphoria, and as you've heard, if you have too high of a level, and especially if you get too high of a level quickly, you can have hallucinations and all the other bad side effects of too much in your system too quickly. And this is especially true of the concentrated forms and the so-called candy forms in children. Some of the problems, other than that, it interferes with new memories, so obviously that's going to interfere with learning. And also the psychomotor skills, which are involved in, of course, driving and things. Now, there are some good benefits, and especially in the oral form, the prescriptive form, and that would be nausea and vomiting in cancer patients, and also in the AIDS patients, the ones that they're wasting away and they have poor appetite. So the THC is beneficial, and I want to mention that the dosages are very small compared to some of the joints that you've seen up on the screen. We're talking about 2.5 milligrams, 5 milligrams, up to 10 milligrams. This is an oral form. It lasts for hours. It's a very steady level, whereas if you smoke it, you're going to get a sudden peak. It's kind of like smoking a cigarette. You get that sudden peak of nicotine in your system, and then of course you have a pretty immediate withdrawal and you smoke another cigarette. No one smokes just one cigarette, and they become addicted. Well, that's about all I have to say, because I think it's been pretty well covered as far as the THC. But as I alluded to earlier, I've learned a lot about the laws that have been passed in the past, and if I could have a few more minutes with you, I would tell you that after reading and learning about this, I've been in contact with Senator Langford's office. I spoke to Steve Underwood, and I've also sent the senator some of my thoughts about what the problem is. And you know, we always talk about what Congress is not doing, but I'm here to tell you something they have been doing, and I think it's wrong, and could be some of the root cause of why this has spread. And the first thing I'd tell you was late in the 1900s and then the first part of this millennium, there was some lobbyists that, and I won't go in, I don't want to say who it might have been, but by now you probably can imagine. But they tried 5 times to put an amendment on the omnibus spending bill, and it was voted down 5 times. And finally, a senator and a senator and a representative, the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment passed. And those are the 2 people that got that on the omnibus spending bill. And as you know, that's an annual bill. However, every year since then, it's been renewed. And actually, the U.S. Attorney General Sessions asked that that not be renewed. However, as you know, the bill passed, and that's still on it. Well, now an even worse thing has happened, and that is the States Act, which is strengthening the 10th Amendment through entrusting states. And what that, as you know, that act means that the federal government has authority over the states if it's not specifically delegated to the states to manage that. And I know that sounds like a lot of gobbledygook. It did to me too. But there was a Supreme Court case in 2005, which was Gonzalez versus Rake. And the Supreme Court upheld the United States. And that case had to do with legalized marijuana in California. And the Supreme Court of the United States said that Congress may not allow medical marijuana in the United States. So that tells me that Congress could do away with medical marijuana in the United States. Now, the first act I mentioned, I have a hard time pronouncing that, Rohrabacher-Farr amendment. And what that says is that prevents, and it states in the word interfering, it says it prevents the DEA, which is part of the DOJ, Department of Justice, it prevents them from interfering with the control of medical marijuana. So the hands have been tied now for years, and I think that's one of the reasons medical, quote, medical marijuana, which is not medical to me, is spreading. And the other thing is our legislature in the House and Senate have already passed bills that they have said will go into effect the day that this is voted on, 788. So that's another thing, that the people are voting for one thing, and I guarantee I've read part of 180 pages in the House and 50 pages in the Senate bill. I'd encourage you to get online and read it too. But what you're voting on is not what you're going to get. So that's just another aside. And I'm sure I don't want to take any more time away from Dr. Gray, but he will also probably, he can back me up on, we have a system already for controlled drugs where the doctor and the pharmacist will check to see if that person is getting narcotics from another physician or source, legal source. So I think that the system we have now and is successful and adequate for prescribing THC and cannabidiol, and we don't need this. So I think what we're going to be voting on is unnecessary. So that's all I have, and I hope I appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brett Gray is the Clinical Medical Director at Cherokee Nation Health Services, the AMO in Salina, Oklahoma, and Kuwiskui, did I get that right? Oshaleta, Oklahoma. Brett is from Stillwell High School, graduated from Stillwell High School in Stillwell, Oklahoma. Any Stillwell folks here? He has an Associate of Arts in Biology from Northeastern Oklahoma A&M in Miami. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Biology from the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. Medical doctorate degree, University of Oklahoma College of Medicine, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. He's also a board-certified family physician for the University of Oklahoma Family Medical Residency Program, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Would you welcome Dr. Brett Gray to our stage?
Thank you. Thank you for coming to this important community meeting, and I'd like to thank Susan Rogers and Richard Salter for their presentation. I thought it was very informative, somewhat eye-opening, and very important information for us all to consider and digest. And thanks, Dr. Mike, for inviting me to be here. And a lot of things that I had on my mind were similar to what Dr. Mobley relayed to you, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but I have a few comments. First of all, the active ingredients that have potential benefit that are found in marijuana are legal and available currently, both federally and in Oklahoma. If we need some further indications for CBD or THC, then there's a process for that, where that can be studied, go through the process and get the FDA approval. And then it is scientifically proven to be beneficial and easily regulated. Marijuana is addictive. Marijuana increases the risk of psychosis in users. It has other health problems. if it's chronically used, emphysema, COPD, etc. Two principles of medical practice are non-malfeasance and beneficence. And that is Latin for first, do no harm, second, do some good if you can. So first of all, we're supposed to do no harm, and I'm concerned that legalizing, quote, medical marijuana, unquote, may do harm. And that's the medical perspective. The personal perspective is there's a lot of vagueness in state question verbiage. The state question 788. It has not been vetted well enough. The conditions for prescribing marijuana have not been defined. There are no provisions for local restrictions or zoning. The amount possessible, I think, if you looked at what is added up, is unreasonable. And so those are things that we all have to consider. We all need to do our civic duty and go and vote. So I hope that you guys have gotten informed better tonight, and we'll make a decision and get out Tuesday and take that to the polls. And thank you for your time.
I'm sorry, I actually need to ask one thing really quick, and I do not mean to be rude by any means. Are you guys going to allow Q&A at the end of this, or are you speaking and that's it?
No Q&A. No Q&A.
Deuces.
Don Raleigh's the superintendent, Pryor Public Schools, Pryor, Oklahoma. Don graduated from Sequoia High School, Claremore, Oklahoma. Has a Bachelor of Science degree in Natural Sciences from Northwestern Oklahoma State University in Alva, Oklahoma. A Master of Science in Curriculum and Instruction from Oklahoma State University in Stillwater. And a Doctor of Education in School Administration from Oklahoma State University in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Would you please welcome to the stage Dr. Don Raleigh.
Thank you. I appreciate the speakers previously. First disclaimer is I want to make sure you understand I'm coming here when I was asked to speak and be a part of this forum. I did it as a personal citizen, as an individual, not representing our school district or our school board. But as an educator, there are things that I am concerned about with this legislation. To borrow a little bit of Will Rogers, if you will, because being in the Claremore area, I kind of grew up in Sequoia, he said, everything I know I learned in the papers. The second part of that was it's my alibi for my ignorance. So when I looked into this, I started talking about or thinking about what is this going to look like as far as policy for schools and for educators. And it does really concern me because it is, in my mind, as an individual citizen, is bad policy. It's bad for educators. And I started jotting down as I was thinking about what this would mean for our schools. And the first one I think they've really addressed is this is an access problem for us already for marijuana, illicit drugs, opioids, things like that for our kids. To tell me that when we can have 448 joints legally in a home, that they're not going to have access or more access than they already have as students and as adolescents, there's going to be a problem. And we're going to deal with that. We are already dealing with the opioid symptoms of the overdoses and just the situations in the homes as far as the drug overdoses. And this is a regulated prescription that we already have doctors that are giving prescriptions for. We have, in our county, one of the worst rates of opioid abuse anywhere in the nation. And to say that if we're going to add this and make this now kind of a free-for-all with marijuana, to me that just really concerns me about the access process for our kids. Since we're already dealing with incarcerated parents, we're already dealing with all the symptoms that come from overdose and opioid abuse, adding this to really is a concern for me. The other concern is as a workplace concern, when you have the ability for a 2-year prescription where a doctor's never going to revisit that prescription, that they're able to grow this and use this for 2 years. I have bus drivers that we entrust the safety of our kids to that I will worry about. We already have drug testing pieces there, but symptoms are 30 to 45 days in the system. Someone could abuse that. Just the entire workplace safety, not only for an employer like the school district, but for all of our employers. I think that's a concern. This may be silly, but when we have ball games, basketball, football games, things like that, and someone is in the stands now and they have the right to go ahead and smoke their medical prescription marijuana in the middle of the stands and I can't remove them for that, that's going to be kind of a problem, I would think, for all the people that are at that venue and at that event. We already have no tobacco rules, and we have challenges getting people to not used to chewing tobacco and things like that. We have to ask them to leave. We put our administrators in a position of really being kind of crossways with our patrons sometimes because they just won't follow the rules. So when we have to now ask our administrators to go out and have someone removed for what they say is a medical marijuana reason, we're in the middle of trying to decide, is that a legal, real issue that they have, or are we able to remove them? Can we, can't we? It puts us in a pretty tough situation. The secondhand smoke, of course, I'm concerned about that for our kids as far as being in a home that has a medical marijuana situation going on. Those kids are going to be secondhand smoke already. We know what that looks like for regular cigarettes, and that concerns me. And just the federal requirements and the regulations and the federal, what we're held to as far as standards. We receive federal money in our school districts, and now we have state law versus federal law. Federal law says you can't do it, state law says you can do it. What's that do for us? Does that open us up potentially, as we said, for lawsuits? That's a challenge. We sometimes, most of our parents, we have a really very supportive community here. We've been very blessed to have education be held highly in our community. Most of our parents are doing the right thing, but we have a handful full of situations in which our kids are not taken care of the way they need to be. And that concerns me, to allow one more avenue for those students that are going into those situations where there maybe isn't what we hopefully would have for the support for our kids and for our youth. There's already paths made, and it's very clear that there are paths to deal with this. When we need a campfire, you don't start a forest fire. And that's kind of what I see this is there's so many negatives here. Occam's razor says use the simplest path to get to the solution. We have paths for that solution right now. We have paths that are medically prescribed that they can address that. And I'm not taking away from the compassion I can feel for those situations. But there are things in place. Let's not open up a Pandora's box so we don't know what's the end's going to be. Thank you.
Tom Linehan is the retired superintendent of Adair Public Schools for many, many years. He's a graduate of Adair High School, Adair, Oklahoma, Associate of Arts degree, Northeastern Oklahoma A&M in Lima, Oklahoma, a Bachelor of Science in Business Education from the University of Oklahoma in Norman, and a Master in Secondary Administration from Northeastern State University in Tahlequah. Would you welcome, please, Tom Linehan.
I feel like I have information overload. Does anybody else feel that way? Whew, my head's about to explode. As I was volunteered to serve on this panel, thanks to Dr. Mike, I began thinking about this from three different perspectives as a school person or a school administrator, having spent 40 years in public education, the best part of which I'm now a retired 40-year school employee. I tried to look at it from the standpoint of the employees, the standpoint of the parents and caretakers that we deal with every day, and most importantly, from the perspective of the students. Those are the three individual groups that I tried to get us a perspective on how I would deal with medical marijuana if this issue passes Tuesday. As I first looked at the employees, we all know if this passes in August, we're going to have an employee come to us with a prescription. We know that's going to happen. We also know that we have a responsibility as school administrators and school boards to provide a safe working environment for our employees, especially those employees that work around the students, such as bus drivers, cafeteria workers, teachers, paraprofessionals. We have a responsibility to make sure our students are ensured a safe environment. Well, I got to thinking, how is this going to contribute or make that environment safe or unsafe? Well, I see many problems arising out of that, especially when you have an employee that gets up in the morning before coming to school and uses marijuana medicinally and then comes to school. We don't know how that employee is going to be affected. And he's going to be dealing with our kids on a personal basis. And we know that's going to happen if this passes. Secondly, we deal with parents a lot in public education. Sometimes we deal with parents that are not very happy. Sometimes they're even angry at us. Now, we have a parent that's using marijuana medicinally, of course. How is it going to affect them in the way we deal with them? Is it going to make them easier to deal with? Is it going to make them harder to deal with? Is it going to make them easier to reason with? Or is it going to make them harder to reason with? We don't know. It's fear of the unknown. It affects each individual. I've been told this. I can't testify to it. I've been told it affects different people different ways. So how is it going to affect that parent when they come to school and that we have to deal with every day, when it's our job and our responsibility to provide the best education for that child that we can provide? Now let's move on to the students, which is the most important part of this puzzle. I never thought I'd be standing on stage talking about medical marijuana student use in school. Now, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe if you're under 18, to get a prescription, you have to have 2 doctors prescribe and parent permission. Is it just one parent? One parent permission, 2 doctors, right? Okay, so they can get a prescription if they're under 18. Well, in Oklahoma, we like to practice what's called local control. In other words, the people in Pryor, their school board, we've got a school board member out here, I know, Dean Robertson. Dean, raise your hand. All right, Dean will tell you as a school board member, he has 2 jobs. One, hire the superintendent. That's him. You better keep him. You better do whatever you have to do to keep him. Okay. And number 2, their other job as school board is to set policies and procedures. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess when Dean was elected to the school board, he didn't really think he'd be having to develop a policy about student use of medical marijuana. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that was the last thing from his mind. Now, how many of you out there, this is the audience participation part, how many of you ever went to school in your life? Raise your hand. Good, good, good. We've got an educated group here. All right, now, this is the trick question here. How many of you took something to school that you weren't supposed to take at one time or another? Raise your hand. You better get your hand up. Now, if there are 488 joints sitting around the house, do you think little Junior might accidentally take one of those to school with him? It's going to happen. It already happens. I mean, when you catch a kid with marijuana at school, you know what the first thing they say? It's my dad's, it's my mom's. I took it out of their drawer. That's what they say. So now they can have 488 of them legally sitting around the house. And you think they're going to know if one of them disappears and goes to school with little Johnny? It's going to happen. That's right. Now, but let's talk about the other aspect. The student that actually has a prescription for this medical marijuana, okay? That's going to happen. We're going to have students, and they're able to get 2 doctors and 1 parent to agree that they need medicinal marijuana. Well, under IDEA, federal law, as a school district, we have to provide the least restrictive environment for a student to learn. And that means we have to take care of their disabilities. Well, if they have this disability and this medical marijuana, they have a prescription that says this medical marijuana makes that disability better, we have to provide them a learning environment. That's federal law. So, you're going to have to develop a policy to dispense the medical marijuana at school. Now, if you do a little research of the states that have this, and our presenters already alluded to it, and they did a great job, states and schools are being sued because they've tried to restrict the way the student can use the medical marijuana at school, or by saying they can't use it at all at school. Now, I will say this, since we do practice local control, I don't think under federal law that if you're at a ball game they would be able to light up a joint in the lobby because of the Clean Air, the Federal Clean Air Act. So we would probably remove them at Adair. And, that's just local control. Do what, it's your interpretation of the law. But the Federal Clean Air Act says no smoking at school, on public school grounds. So, it's fear of the unknown. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? So, to make a long story short, back to the IDEA, we have to provide that child who's under medication the least restrictive learning environment. So we've got to figure out a way we're going to allow them to take, first, are we going to allow them to take the medical marijuana at school? Are we going to allow that? Well, what's the federal government say about marijuana? The federal government says marijuana is illegal. We don't care if it's recreational or medicinal. Well, we get money from the federal government. So, Dr. Mobley used a fancy word I was going to use, conundrum. We're in a real conundrum here. Are we going to break federal law and let them use the marijuana, or are we going to break the federal law and not provide them with the least restrictive environment? See the can of worms this opens up? Whew, boy, it's a good time to be retired. But on a serious note, we base all our decisions. What's best for kids? What's best for kids? Allowing them to use marijuana look at the statistics. What's it do? It's addictive. It leads to other drugs. It harms their body. So, and I cannot support in any way this legislation that's being brought to the people. I believe if you take and study, and I had a stack of, I've been doing my research, I had a stack of newspapers about 6 weeks worth there, but then they said forget what you read in the media, so I got to forget everything I've been reading the last 6 weeks. But this bill is poorly written. It's 5 pages long. And guess what? If it passes, the legislature, Senator Quinn, what are you going to be charged with? Going back in session, special session. Okay? So, it's too vague. I cannot stand up here and say that, I would never support medical marijuana in one form or another. I can't say that because one of these days there might be something better come along. But this bill right now that we're faced with is just too vague. Too vague. And it doesn't even specify what condition it can be prescribed for. Every other state has 5 to 10 probably medical conditions that you can prescribe. This one has no specified medical condition. It could be ingrown toenail. I know that sounds silly, but it could be. And school children, you're going to see it prescribed for autism, you're going to see it prescribed for ADD, you're going to see it prescribed for ADHD, you're going to see it prescribed for a plethora of different conditions because none of them are specified in the bill, in the law. So, I know I'm taking too much time, and we've been here a long time, but under its current form, that's one problem I have with it. The other problem I have with it is the Oklahoma Department of Health is a regulatory agency in charge of administrating this. Senator Quinn, have you had any problems with the Oklahoma Department of Health? Oh, yeah, you mean they convinced everybody that they were broke and you all gave them $30 million to bail them out? And guess what? They had a slush fund. They weren't broke. So, but that's just another problem I have with the bill, among others. I could go on and on, but I read all that stuff in the paper, so I'm trying to separate the truth, from, like Dr. Mike said, we're here to learn the truth. So, and then there was another problem I had was what type of physician can write a script for this? Can a veterinarian really write?
Yes. Despite what's been said, another statute that they're not looking at, that yes, they can.
Okay, so. So, picture this. A veterinarian can write a script for medical marijuana. Thank you for your time.
Brian Serber is the first Assistant District Attorney, District 12, a graduate of Ponca City High School, Ponca City, Oklahoma. As I said, these are Okies. Bachelor of Science in Political Science from Oklahoma State University in Stillwater, a Juris Doctorate from the University of Oklahoma College of Law in Norman, Oklahoma. Would you please welcome to our stage Brian Serber?
Thank you all very much. Is that on?
Yeah.
Can y'all hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, so as you heard, I'm an attorney by trade, which means I'm an authority on nothing. What I can do is I can actually cite other authorities. Now, again, in my kind of career, I've been in law enforcement 22 years now. First as an assistant DA, then in legal division at the Bureau when I first met Susan. I had a midlife crisis in my 30s, became a special agent, a narcotics agent for about 8 years, and then I've been about 4 years working back as an attorney again. So I've been around narcotics enforcement, drug use for about 22 years. Now again, this is being pitched as a medical marijuana bill. And what do we have in support of that? We have medical evidence, we have science, we have anecdotes. What do I mean by anecdotes? Well, some media representation of a mother that says, so the CBD helped my child stop the seizures. A veteran, typically a veteran, that is taking 20 opiate pills a day. And if you legalize marijuana, I'll take less opiates, as if the binary choice of marijuana use reduces opiate consumption. Well, there's a correlation. You see, according to the SAMHSA study that, and this is borne out by virtually any research that's done, use of marijuana, when you use marijuana, your likelihood of opiate use disorder increases threefold. You're 3 times greater. So there's a correlation. It doesn't reduce opiate use. It actually increases it. In fact, if you just kind of look at it, we've never had more medicinal and recreational marijuana use in this country in the last several years since this push began by these lobbyists and interests. Yet this also paralleled the largest single drug epidemic in our country's history by any measure. Overdoses, deaths, whatever it might be. And so what do we have? Well, again, why aren't anecdotes enough? Well, there's a reason researchers in the scientific process use a double-blind study. They use placebos. It's because information of both the tester and the subject knowing they're taking it affects the results. They first used this actually in the 18th century, 1700s, with the animal magnetism. Mesmerists claimed they could heal people from this invisible energy. And a commission, I believe Ben Franklin chaired it, began with the double-blind study and found actually, although people reported they improved because of the mesmerists, mesmerists themselves reported they were having the results on their patients. When the double-blind study was done, there was no discernible difference between those individuals. Yet anecdotes is all we have, all just portrayed in the media. So what I can do, again, citing sources, let me quote, the main one we see is, again, typically parents describing an epileptic child. So what I want to quote for you again, you have a letter up there from Dr. Privitera, who is the president of the American Epilepsy Society. And I'll just quote this. This is him speaking. And this is to a legislature considering the legislative change of making medicinal marijuana. The American Epilepsy Society has been opposed to the expanded use of medicinal marijuana or its derivative, cannabidiol or CBD, in the treatment of children with severe epilepsy. Our position is informed by the lack of available research and supported by the position statements from the American Academy of Neurology, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the American Medical Association. Additionally, who also oppose medicinal marijuana, the American Glaucoma Foundation, the Muscular Sclerosis Society, and the American Society for Addictive Medicine. So I can tell you this, the people that get up every day and their mission is to help children with epilepsy and neurological disorders and glaucoma, they're not neutral on CBD and its derivatives and cannabinoids being used for medical purposes. They vehemently oppose it. As Rich and Susan said, there's over 400 research registrations, DEA granted, to research marijuana. There's a reason we have the FDA process. There's a reason there's a scientific method. And the marijuana advocates have lost at the scientific level. The data doesn't back them up. So what's the next step? We get a 1-paragraph summary to vote of the people that summarizes 8 single-spaced pages that contravenes all existing science. So, what do we care? What do we care if someone just kind of uses marijuana for their own personal use medicinally. They think it helps them, so what? Well, again, this is not necessarily theoretical. We've seen what's happened in Colorado. And with Colorado, who, again, 2/3 of local jurisdictions have opted out. A option not afforded in 788. But in Colorado, the felony marijuana, since recreational and medicinal marijuana has been legalized, the felony marijuana arrests have increased by all drug task forces. The interdictions on the highway of marijuana have increased. The parcel interdictions have increased 700%. The personal use citations, illegal consumption in public, have increased. At every indicator, they've increased. You see, why is THC so high? We talked about THC again. Why is that? You see, when California began this in the late 90s, they actually said we can't get marijuana at Walgreens and CVS, so let's give them a license for a plant. So marijuana advocates put all of their energy into making this kind of super weed. Back when I started in 96, all marijuana came from south of the border, about 3 to 4% THC. The marijuana industry, domestic marijuana industry, primarily from Colorado, Oregon, and California, actually ran the drug cartels out of business because the THC went up so much, the cartels could not give away their Mexican weed, which was the premier stuff compared to like ditch weed we had before. And so at every level, it became called Reggie for a while. You got high grade or Reggie. And Reggie was the stuff from south of the border, international stuff. Now it's not even Reggie anymore. All weed's just high grade. Because see, California was supposed to be personal medical use. Colorado was supposed to be small recreational use for the individual. What we found was it was diverted and they supplied the entire nation. So what about the numbers here? We've heard about the number of joints. So this is one final number. Can't do a lot of math when the law school, I can do some. And let's think about this. We heard the number of what you would allow out to have. Now, it's reasonable to assume that's a 30-day supply. Any prescription you get, any controlled substance, you get it for 30 days. That's the maximum amount, so we'll give you 30 days. How much is that? Well, in a 30-day period, assuming you sleep 8 hours a day, and assuming you work 40 hours a week, every waking hour to consume just your green marijuana, not the growing plants, the harvested marijuana. You have to smoke 2 joints every waking hour. In addition, you need to pop 2.8 gummy bears every hour. On your way to work, that's your lunch hour. That's just to use the green leaf matter. It's not the plants. That's not the concentrate, the ounce of concentrate. That's really the potent stuff. So is that going to be diverted, do you think? It happens every time. And we've seen with massive amounts of marijuana the effect on youth. We've seen in Colorado the traffic deaths. We've seen where that happens. This isn't just affect the individual user. Massive amounts are diverted and sent out there in supporting the industry. And that's why in Colorado, seeing no reduction in crime. And legalizing it, this whole prohibition argument hasn't kind of panned out. Because personal use arrests are up, and the felony marijuana arrests are up as well, even though they're the epicenter of recreational marijuana. And with 2/3 opting out in Colorado, they've seen that. We don't have that in Oklahoma, and the amounts in Oklahoma are far greater. A quarter pound more than is felony distribution in Colorado is allowed just with the harvested green matter in Oklahoma. And that is why I get paid. If someone's getting paid up here, I want to know where this is. But I've been around this 22 years. I've seen that. That's why I very vehemently think that we know what's going to happen. We absolutely know what's going to happen in schools, with youth. And one difference, Colorado, they have difficulty in actually finding individuals past drug tests in Colorado. It's in the HIDA report. So that would be a problem in Oklahoma, because in Oklahoma, you're prohibited from taking action for positive drug tests. School bus driver has a crash, tests hot for weed, the law prohibits the employer from taking action. It creates a protected class, like disability, like race, being a cannabis license holder. Judges can't use it in child custody matters unless it's an unreasonable danger. See, the law allows reasonable dangers to children. Landlords and growing, it is something over and beyond what we see. So I appreciate it very much, and thank you all for listening. Now, I know I'm at the end here, which means probably hope most of you all will be left where I got to speak, but thank you all very much for coming.
We have heard repeatedly that Oklahoma is really in a fortunate position, not having to be the guinea pig. We have heard repeatedly references to Oregon, California, and Colorado where we already know what is taking place. Now, friends, if you know that you're going to be playing with a snake and you know that it's poisonous and you know that it's bitten everybody that's played with it before, why would we want to play with a snake? Ultimately, what I want to do at this point is I want to ask you to pick up my pen. Thank you. I want to ask if you, as panel members, have a question for one of the other panel members. You have a question. Give him the microphone there. You've got one.
Referring to mine.
Let's get him on. Make sure you're on.
Am I on?
Yes.
Yeah, it's on. Okay, hold it close.
Referring to my legal findings, with one of the legal people, do you have any comments regarding the States Act that is pending, a bicameral, bipartisan act that's pending, or the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment that happens every year that ties the hands of the federal DEA and all of the states that have medical marijuana? Do you have any comments on that?
On the, I can't say either. On the Rohrabacher-Farr. Rohrabacher-Farr. Here you get that way. All right. I think there's some limitations in that, and I wish I would be up on that law, but I believe that applies to states that have already legalized marijuana.
Yes.
But I think it's limited in scope based on some of the components of the drug, because Attorney General Sessions, when he took office, repealed what we called the Cole Memo, which was basically told federal law enforcement hands off. Don't enforce the the marijuana laws, period, the federal marijuana laws. It didn't tell us not to, but it recommended that we spend our resources in other places. So when the Attorney General under Holder puts that out, well, the U.S. attorneys in each district, they take that and says, all right, DEA and other federal agencies, we're not going to take your marijuana cases. So when Jeff Sessions took office, he repealed that memo. He gave direction to all the U.S. attorneys we're going to enforce the laws. We're going to enforce the laws on the book. We're not going to be selective about what we enforce and what we don't enforce. It was a breath of fresh air for us. I know under the previous administration, the immigration laws were not enforced. The marijuana laws were not enforced, and now they're enforced again. And what you guys are seeing in the media is trying to put that genie back in the bottle. And so with respect to marijuana, it's difficult, but I can tell you in Oklahoma, we're going to enforce the marijuana laws until someone tells us to stop enforcing marijuana laws. Good. And that includes physicians who have a DEA license to prescribe Scheduled 2 and 3 substances, because from our perspective, if any physician that would prescribe Schedule 1 substance that's illegal shouldn't have a DEA license to prescribe. So we'll take action until someone slaps our hand and tells us to stop taking action.
Thank you. Thank you. I also found it staggering to know that Colorado has 2/3 of the counties that opted out because they had that caveat in the way that the law was written. 2/3 were able to opt out, but still the crime, all the statistics continue to continue to climb. Our law, or this ballot, this state question, does not have that caveat of counties being able to opt out. That is frightening Friends, that is absolutely frightening. Somebody else from the panel, where you have a question for someone else who is sitting here. Here's one.
I think Brian and I can both talk to this. If you all think back to the last state question that passed, it made all the drugs misdemeanors. I've seen a huge difference in court and what happens. So I have arraignments for people that are in jail. And, typically I'd ask them, after they get arraigned and we're deciding what they, need for their sentence or let them out of jail or not. I ask them, will you pass a drug test? No. What will it show me? Well, my historical answer is 80% pot. Now I get PCP, heroin, meth on a regular basis like it's not a big deal. And so by passing that, it has normalized some of those taboo, drugs that they even wouldn't tell the judges that they were on. And it's caused a lot of other issues. I can tell you the cops are telling me that they're seeing people shoot up heroin in front of a 7-Eleven. They would have never done that, but now it's a misdemeanor, so they don't care. And I know Brian's got a whole bunch of more experiences than that from his prosecutor standpoint.
Yeah, one of the difficulties with this is on 780 is that drug courts are set up for felony offenders. And so with possession of heroin, again, if a drug dealer, child molester gets out of prison and he shoots heroin on the playground at school, and essentially he has a traffic ticket. We have the most liberal drug laws in Oklahoma. And that essentially just, and the drug court is something we utilized quite a bit, but it required a felony drug charge. So it greatly reduced the felony drug charge because drug court is set up for users, not dealers. Well, that left kind of dealers simply being the only felonies, or people that habitually use. Most crimes, DUI, domestic assault and battery, the more you commit a crime, the more serious it gets, kind of being, if you don't learn your lesson, you should face a harsher penalty. However, 780 didn't do that. So, again, it's just kind of what you see when you normalize something, legalize it. Cigarettes and alcohol have kind of provided us a very sober view of what happens with the widespread use. And then those are historically going quite a ways back. And again, it's surprising to me. I'll tell you one of the things that just has bothered me. And I should say that I get mad, talk, I'll start sweating and get ticked off here probably. But, I've been in the dope game 22 years. And the fact it took a presidential cycle for people to say, oh, opiates are addictive, drives me nuts. Saw people using that going so far back, and all of a sudden people say it like, hey, yeah, it's like everyone knew it all along. I just now learned opiates are addictive. And again, we had a commercial interest overseen by doctors. The fact to say, well, if it's going to be, let's tax it, regulate it, and supervise it by doctors, it can be safe. Well, our opiate epidemic should kind of give us guidance in that. And again, we had the same thing kind of in my lifetime with tobacco. People saying, look with a straight face, tobacco doesn't cause cancer. And I find it shocking that people right now, we have this agency, the massive tobacco settlement. When tobacco commercial interests pushed cigarettes onto the public, and it caused massive health issues. And now that we have people, look, guys, the people that actually believe in medicinal marijuana for their own personal use, they absolutely believe it, and it's because they have the reasons they're going to believe that, regardless of what any kind of data or study shows. But when we've seen this kind of with tobacco, so the idea that we are going to smoke a carcinogen, and we're going to push on everybody by health purposes, or with a health agenda. And right now we're reeling from how a pharmaceutical commercial interest pushed opiates as being a safe thing onto the U.S. And now, again, they created that. The U.S. has about 4% of the world's population would consume 95% of the opiate pain medication. So now we have all these opiate addicts, and people are swooping in saying, hey, let's give them all weed now. That'll help. And that's just, it's amazing to me. And I personally that marijuana is medicinal. It may take a while. It's happening actually quicker than we've seen because its use has been so pervasive. We've seen the data from Colorado and California, but I think there's going to be a trifecta in American history of cigarettes aren't addictive. Cigarettes don't cause cancer, opiates aren't addictive, and marijuana is medicinal. I think those two things they're going to perpetuate that on everyone, and they'll kind of see when it catches up at a later time. People don't, right now people in faith, they hear what they want to hear. And, but again, there's a reason. There's a reason you don't see doctors and smart guys like these two down here in lab coats on the Capitol steps going, if I could only give this kid a fat doobie and, and prescribe him a bong, he'd be feeling, but there's a reason for that.
Your last thought on 780 that passed, after 24 years of practicing law, there's two reasons that people get clean that I've ever seen, and there may be a third, but this is the two. Their kids or the threat of going to prison. Not going to prison, the threat of, which is drug court. Now one of those has been removed.
Well, we started out this journey together about trying to be truth detectives. And when you listen to different narratives in the news about whatever subject there is, you've got people that say, these people are telling lies. These people are telling the truth. These people are telling the lies, and these people are telling the truth. And if you ask somebody who's a proponent of State Question 788, they're going to say that we are misrepresenting medical marijuana. They're going to say that the facts on that these people are wrong. And my question would be, well, what makes them wrong and you right? And they're going to say, well, the facts don't support what they're saying. And I'm going to say, what makes your facts more valid than their facts? What makes their facts invalid and makes your facts valid? At some point, friends, we've got to take a look, and we've got a 360, a question. That means go all the way around at 360 degrees, and we've got to assess it. We've got to be truth detectives. And that's one of the reasons why we brought Oklahomans. That's one of the reasons why we brought local people that you know, that you can vet. These guys have been doctors to many of you. You know what these men have done. These are two of the most decorated superintendents in Oklahoma, right here. You know what we've got in a first district attorney. You know that you don't get to be the head of the DEA in Oklahoma by not being good. And you don't get to be a judge and doing what she's done. What I'm saying is that there is credibility that is sitting here that needs to be listened to. They need to be heard. This has been Facebook on our Pryor, First Baptist Church Pryor Facebook page. It's been live streaming from the get-go. We are a transparent people. We are not trying to sneak around. And somebody might say, well, why don't you do an open Q&A? We're trying to 360 this, and we're trying to give the discussion. We're trying to give and answer the questions. There's been, as Tom said, an overload of information. Plenty of information has been given for us to make an informed decision. And the conclusion is that this bill, as it is written, this state question, not a bill, this state question, especially as it is written, in no way, shape, or form does it promote something that is good for our state. In no way. These two men would very much question, all of us would question the validity of putting the word medical in the same sentence beside the word marijuana. These men have demonstrated, as have other presenters, that there can be things that can be taken out of the plant, like CBD and THC, which have been already been legalized in controlled drug form, controlled medical form for a lot of years. Doc Mobley started off by saying, why are we doing this on Tuesday? Why are we even voting on this? The medication that is necessary for those with certain illnesses, that medication's already available. So, with having said these things, what I'm going to do is just thank you for coming. Would you give them a big thank you for coming? Close us in a word of prayer. Would you bow with me, please? Father, we come to you today in the precious name of Jesus once again. And Lord, I thank you for raising up professionals in a variety of fields, a variety of disciplines, as it were. You've raised these people up. And they're people that we look to and that we rely on to give us different perspectives. What it will do for education. We've tried to do that this evening. And I thank you for superintending our gathering. I thank you for protecting us. And I ask God that you will superintend the minds and hearts of voters throughout Oklahoma on Tuesday. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you all so much. You are dismissed.